After everybody starts back.
Where is that?
Yeah. Okay.
So it just says arrows
Well,
right
because
there.
we have like 45 minutes, and we were hoping that we could sit, but I guess we're not sitting.
I mean, you could put it right here. Sit. That's where it was originally.
I guess we're sitting. That's fine. Okay.
So is that what you would want to do?
I guess one of us could. I think whoever is presenting
Sitting there.
Right.
For presenting, I'm coming up here.
Well, we have 40 minutes.
Oh.
And I'm just saying, like, that's a long time to like, be up here, but I guess we could.
Okay.
I was hoping there was a clicker that could sit.
Okay, there we go.
That's why I'm telling everyone arrow.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
That works really well. It doesn't work over the ear headphones, microphone, and just
So really, I just got these all straight. Website.
That's the one thing we have to do that like we have
Generally stressed hard claims actually like fun.
I use it.
So like if any of them freak out, try to call me or email me.
Okay, well, that's good.
We'll see. Yeah, so they can give us feedback, but also just so they can compare for like what their messaging is going to be. Yeah, that's yes. We're not going to be major changes based on their
Every 6.
Just want to alert everyone that we're going to start in 1 minute. Gonna get you. It is exactly 1:15, so that was less than a minute, I'm sure. But I do want to start by welcoming everyone to the State Board of Education workshop. We do have a full agenda this afternoon. And before we get started, I am going to ask Casey to call the roll to establish a quorum.
Mr. Cobbins.
Here.
Mr. Darnell.
Here.
Mr. Eby.
Here.
Mr. Edwards.
Here.
Mr. Ferguson.
Here.
Mr. Jensen.
Here.
Ms. Kim. Mr. Kraus. Mr. Morrow.
Here.
Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman.
We have a quorum.
No.
Thank you so much. Without objection, I resolve that the State Board of Education is now in the Committee of the Whole in order to conduct this workshop. I do want to take a moment to welcome our newest board member to the State Board of Education, Mr. Nate Morrow, who is representing the 7th Congressional District. He is head of school for Christ Presbyterian School. I'm going to ask him to come to the front with me because I'm going to officially welcome him by pinning him. And there's no backing out now.
You better not lose it either. I found that out.
Takes a while to come from back there. Is this the best spot to do it? I do want to also thank the Tennessee Board of Regents for allowing us to use this space. The first agenda item is licensure discipline items. I'm going to ask that each speaker please state your name and title for the record.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members. I am Brittany Kendrick, Assistant General Counsel for Educator Discipline, and this is my colleague, Todd Madison, Staff Attorney for Educator Discipline. This is also his first board meeting with the State Board of Education, so welcome, Todd. So before we talk about or take any questions of the licensure actions, we did have a couple of updates that we wanted to let you know about. First, under item 7A, which is the DHS actions, there will only be one. The Christopher Schillings, he's the only one that's going to be voted on tomorrow. The other individual became compliant between posting on SharePoint and today. So, the second item that I wanted to update you all on, item 7H under the teacher license actions. Mr. Weatherford, there was a typo on the cover sheet. It indicated that he had to register for the sex offender registry. However, there was a typo according to his order of judgment. He did not have to register on the sex offender registry. Other than that, we are happy to take any questions or discuss any items that you all would like to pull to discuss separately at tomorrow's meeting.
Are there any questions? Mr. Eby.
Thank you, Brittany. One of these cases, I know Frank Shaw, that was one that's just coming up now through an ongoing audit. And if I recall correctly, that's the one that happened a few years ago. Is that correct?
No, you mean Miss Colony Molnar? She was the one.
Yes, yeah. I'm sorry. Go on. My question there is, these ongoing audits, I'm glad we're finding them, but if we're not finding them for a couple of years afterwards, what kind of liability does that put us in with regard to these teachers continuing teaching or whatever?
As we discussed prior, so all of these educators, once they get reported by their local school district or another state agency, they get a hold placed on their license and they're placed under state board review. There is no licensure action at that time, but that does kind of give the another state or another entity like another school district put on notice that there is something going on that's leading them to be under review. And so we, in our engagement with stakeholders like local school districts, superintendents, et cetera, we are always informing them of that process, and that if there's ever a question or if they see a hold on someone's license, to always contact us. We're always willing to take questions about why the hold is there and what our process is, because our process, even in spite of the audit and trying to get all of the old cases up to date, does take time because we're such a smaller staff, and it just takes time to investigate the matters fully so that we can make sure that we are bringing you proper recommendations and not, making recommendations that shouldn't be made. So that's one way, that's the biggest way that we try to avoid liability, is that we make sure that we are educating local school districts that if they see someone with a hold on their license, please contact us as part of their reference check to see why the hold is there before they employ them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Edwards.
So on to Mr. Weatherford and Mr. Isley,
Yes.
they have surrendered their license
That's correct.
and they're agreeing not to reapply for a license for 5 years.
So Mr. Isley, which is item D, he has agreed to voluntarily surrender his license, and he has agreed not to ever apply for restoration of his license. Under Mr. Weatherford, which is item H, he too has voluntarily surrendered his license, and as a condition of his surrender, he agrees not to apply for restoration for 5 years from the date of the consent order.
So why would we, what's the thought of him being eligible to apply, which would infer he's eligible to be reinstated?
Mr. Edwards, I'm sorry to interrupt. Boy, this one's loud. Your microphone, is it on?
And you knew that.
No, Amy did. Thank you. This is really loud. Ooh.
Just, what's their thought about him being eligible to reapply after 5 years?
Well, again, that's obviously he can apply for restoration, but that restoration granting would be at the discretion of the board. The board doesn't have to grant him restoration at that time. Additionally, because of the information we have for Mr. Weatherford, we only had the conviction, which was judicial diversion. It was a misdemeanor offense. And just looking at our rule, because we don't know the underlying conduct, our rule the only thing we can really rely upon is good cause. And so not knowing all of the details of the offense, we thought it was proper to not make it a permanent revocation, but make it just a regular revocation.
What was the charge?
He was charged with solicitation of a minor.
And he pleaded guilty.
He actually pled guilty, but he was given an order of judicial diversion, so he was given probation for 1 year.
I'm not a lawyer, so does that mean he pleaded guilty to solicitation of a minor?
So it's a conditional plea. So if he in fact, and I'm not a criminal attorney, but my understanding of the conditional plea is that if he successfully completes probation at the end of the year, he in fact could have the charge dismissed and have the record expunged.
See, I think there's two different processes going on here. I think that the legal system is working its part, and there's reasons to give diversions, there's reason. Our look, in my mind, is something totally different. And how a court looks at it and how we look at it, the same offense, I'd hate to explain that to a parent at some point in time who rightfully would be alarmed, particularly if he's pleaded guilty, regardless of what the terms were. And so you're right, we don't have to reinstate, but to even be eligible to be reinstated seems like a concern.
And that's totally a valid concern. We just, from a legal standpoint, and as the attorneys and looking at how our rule is written, because we did not know the underlying conduct and we only have the misdemeanor offense, our rule does allow for felony convictions for a permanent revocation, but for misdemeanors, it's a little trickier without knowing all of the details of the offense. So we thought it was more appropriate to do just a general revocation as opposed to the permanent.
Well, maybe if maybe
Because if it was a felony, we would have recommended a permanent revocation. Same as Mr. Isley, but it wasn't in this
maybe
case.
it's my lay brain or lame brain, I guess. But solicitation of a minor felony, solicitation of a minor misdemeanor, it's hard for me to separate. It's a distinction without a difference.
And we tend to agree, which is why we have proposed some legislation to the state legislature to include all of these offenses as potentially revocable and additional, maybe permanent offenses. But as of right now, this is how the law is written.
So do we have, as the law is written, the authority to take away that 5-year right to reapply?
How the rule is written and what he pled guilty to, I don't think so. It's
Well,
our
we
opinion.
could have knifed through this whole conversation, or you just told me that.
That's why the recommendation was what it was, because it's a misdemeanor offense.
Never mind.
And it is quite unfortunate that that's what the courts did, but that's where we are.
Mike, I still think it was important to get that clarification because it was my understanding what Brittany just explained was the reality. But I think it was still important for everyone to hear that because we still have new board members who do not know that, do not understand that. So as much as we might desire to take a different action, we're not in a legal position to do so. So, any other questions? Yes, Mr. James.
Madam Chair, and I appreciate this coming up, and I appreciate the good back and forth on this. The bill that she's referring to is actually up in subcommittee this next week, and it makes a very good point. We recall that our rulemaking authority is on a strict construction model, and that means if the statute doesn't specifically authorize it, we can't take the action as if it did. In some cases, I mean, one of the provisions is the difference between arson and aggravated arson. Or another provision that's in the law now is child pornography over 100 images, as if child pornography at 99 images would be okay. But because of the strict construction, it has to be specifically authorized in the law. And so the counselor and all the legal team has worked very hard on putting together some excellent legislation that we're going to bring to try to remedy that exact point.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Edwards.
So, glad I had that little extra time. So, this comes up, what it makes, is this grandfathered in whether the legislature passes a law going forward? Would he be under the law as it is today, or would it apply as it may be a change?
So if I understand what you're asking correctly, so we consider when the misconduct happened or the order came down, so it wouldn't be, so
Okay.
any future law would not be applicable.
Okay, so should anyone who's under this type of restraint, 5 years, when they reapply, will that application have attached to it this?
Yes,
There won't be a chance that it would,
unless for some reason he had the record expunged, but if we were able to ascertain, or he indicated in his application, which has happened before, what the underlying misconduct was, we would be making our decision to restore the license based upon the underlying conduct. For example, a gentleman a couple of years ago applied for restoration after a similar offense. He got that record expunged. We recommended denial of restoration. He requested a hearing. At the hearing, his argument was, well, my record was expunged. My argument to the judge was that, yes, your record is expunged, and but the board is not relying upon the criminal record to deny your restoration. We're relying upon the misconduct that happened that led to your criminal record, because in your application, you told us what that was about. And so we won. So that's the difference. That's the distinction. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
I do have a question.
Oh, you do. Thank you.
Speaking on the reapplication, if he reapplies wherever, does it come back to us to look at it?
All restoration applications come before the board, whether it's a recommendation to grant or deny. You all get the say of whether or not to allow them to come back or deny them.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
If this gentleman was to move to another state or any of those things, does this follow with him?
Yes, so whenever we take action against an educator, we're required by law to report it not only on our public website, but to also report it to the National Clearinghouse. So yes, it does follow them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Next up is someone I should have recognized at the beginning of the meeting, and that's Miss Amy Owen. She is Policy Director for the State Board of Education. She is here representing Executive Director Sarah Morrison, who many of you know is not with us today because she recently gave birth to a new baby boy. So we're pleased to have Amy with us, and we're thankful that Sarah has had a great delivery, and she's now at home with her baby boy. So please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also here with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Nathan James, and we will be providing an update on the board's master plan, which was adopted in July of 2019 for the forthcoming school year. This is our midpoint, and we'd like to let you know briefly how we're progressing along for all of our goals and benchmarks. The board set its master plan priority areas in these 4 areas: high expectations and positive learning environments, great teachers and leaders, high quality school options, and public engagement and oversight. We've set goals in these areas for 5 years now, and we're coming up on time to reset our 5-year strategic goals. We've been working with a consultant to do interviews with all of you, as well as with many education stakeholders in the state. And that will reset our 5-year student achievement goals that we work to as a board, as well as our master plan for the next year. So we look forward to sharing more about that in the coming months. In this presentation, we're going to be using this sort of nomenclature that we've used before, where if you see a benchmark with a green check, it's been completed. The filled-in blue circle is in progress and on track, and the open red circle either means that it hasn't happened yet or needs an additional focus, something about it has changed, that kind of thing. So we'll start with our strategic priority area 1, high expectations and positive learning environments. These focus on our rigorous academic standards through our standards review process, with opportunity for input from educators, parents, and the public, and also ways to support student success through positive instructional climate. And this is a lot of text. You do have this in front of you. My apologies. We do have several different benchmarks in the area of high expectations. The first is to work with the department to develop a long-range plan for standards review. Which year will math be reviewed? Which year will science be reviewed? And so on. That helps provide transparency for districts and educators. That's now been completed and is posted on the State Board's website. We are in the process of conducting a thorough and transparent review of the Tennessee Academic Standards for Math. Just last weekend, we had several dozen Tennessee educators from K-12 and higher ed at our offices in Nashville, reviewing over 33,000 responses from the public to an online survey we had open last fall to give us feedback about the math standards. That work will progress over the next few months, and we will be providing you updates along the way. We had a goal to lead a working group of state and district leaders to look at our graduation requirements and ensure that they're still aligned with what's expected at post-secondary and in prominent career fields in the state. That working group has met several times. Vice Chair Eby is the chair of that working group, and we're going to meet again in March. We are identifying right now some areas in existing career and technical education courses that could provide flexibility within graduation requirements. For example, does an engineering course in CTE have enough science that it could count for a third lab science? Does an accounting or a business course have enough math content that it could count as a fourth year math? So we'll continue to work with that working group and bring you recommendations. Feel free to stop me, I'm going pretty quick. Okay. Ensuring updates from the department are provided at each workshop or at other intervals on TN Ready procurement, administration, and results. We so appreciate the Commissioner joining us for all of our workshops and giving us great updates about how the assessment is moving forward, in addition to our new testing and accountability subcommittee, which met in August and then just a few weeks ago in January. One area that we need to do some data digging on before we meet in July is to provide you with updates on the state's progress toward goals for meeting academic standards, particularly in early grades literacy, which is obviously a focus for multiple agencies across the state. So we look forward to sharing the most current data possible with you all and working with the DOE to provide that. The second benchmark in this area is positive learning environments, which had two components, school safety and school climate. In terms of school safety, we have a graduate fellow, Faith Christian, who's working with some folks in the Hold Child Division at the Department of Ed to provide a summary that we can give to you all as board members of different initiatives related to school climate, school-based mental health, education for the whole child, so you can see what some of the best practices are in districts across the state, and that's in progress now. And that will participate in state efforts about school safety and monitoring ongoing outcomes of our school safety audits. This is occurring in two areas. One is with our charter schools, because we have several of our charter schools that we authorize. The State Board District received a Safe Schools grant from the Department of Education, and the grant money has been allocated to our schools to fund improvements that are directly tied to the school safety audits. We've also looked at the funding side.
On the funding side, it has, of course, been a constant priority of the BEP Review Committee in many different ways. Now, in some cases, that's a direct ask for more in the area of school safety, but it's also around the mental health and the support staff areas. So.
And then the second area with positive learning environments is looking at school climate. We have a planned project for a policy intern to do a study this spring on school climate and absenteeism in high schools, so we look forward to providing you with some updated data and information there. We've wanted for a little while to look at the revised school counseling policy and program standards. We need to identify the appropriate state-level contacts for this, whether it's with the Department of Education or with Department of Health or other human services kinds of agencies, so we can better understand the landscape of who are our counselors in schools, what are their backgrounds and training, and how well are these policies being implemented. We've also made strides on our licensure rule and policy in terms of increasing the availability of social workers and counselors. You'll hear more about our licensure policy on first reading tomorrow, but I'll let Nathan talk a little bit about the funding side of this one.
So again, we get into the priority process with your BEP Review Committee. Starting about 2016, they undertook the process of saying, okay, we're going to be very targeted with what our specific goals are every year. And as they relate to this issue, one of the major pushes has been to encourage funding of school counselors at a level closer to national best practices. That's a ratio of 1 to 250, and lower the ratio of students to nurses currently funded in the formula at 1 to 3,000. 2018, we got into security and safety funding, coupled with funding the number of school counselors at a better level there. So again, you see the constant push there from the BEP Review Committee. In 2017, it was an issue as well as the nurses. And the point is by listing out a few clear priorities, we've been able to make some real strides in a lot of areas, including having RTI added to the BEP formula. That's also how the 11th and 12th month of insurance was paid for, as well as doubling of the computer and technological funding for schools.
Questions on that first
Can I make one
benchmark?
Can I make one comment, please?
Mr. Eby.
Yep. We just had an excellent session with the Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents, and each one of the board members got to sit with the superintendents from their district. And I'll tell you this, one thing I heard from the superintendents was the importance of funding those counselors so that let the counselors do the counseling work, because that whole child mental health that the commissioner is pushing, that's a key area of that. So continue to push for that. Thank you.
Mr. Edwards?
I mean, maybe you can help me remember. There was some changes to the responsibilities for counselors several years ago, I guess. One was restricting counselors to no more than 20% of their day or work time to something other than counseling, like test administration. So that leaves 80% left. And as I recall, there were like 3 areas of counseling. One was, I know we added, the third one was career counseling, but the
And also
other 2 was
individual counseling for students in need, and then school-wide or class-wide programming. Is that correct? I believe that's the record.
I think so.
Okay.
When I think of those 3, at a 250 to 1, I don't know how there's not going to be enough time, obviously, to do all 3 of those in a ideal way. How does it get prioritized where time, there just simply isn't enough time, so we're going to have to eat our time?
Yeah. That's a great question. That's what we're hoping to be able to provide you with more information on. I don't have a lot of data or statistics or satisfaction information right now about do school counselors feel like that's how their day is actually allocated, or do they feel like it's still more according to previous models of looking at testing or other administrative responsibilities. So that is what's on track to be studied.
You also couldn't take any one of these things in a vacuum, obviously. I mean, if we're talking about safety, we're talking about mental health, well-being, and the whole child. These things are all entirely intertwined. But your institution, this board, as well as that BEP review committee, are trying to use that bully pulpit and that platform to make the point on an annual basis to the administration as well as to the General Assembly that's where that needs to go. And I think with the State of the State on Monday, we saw some extraordinary investments.
Absolutely.
Continue.
Our second priority area is great teachers and leaders will establish policies to ensure all students have access to great teachers and leaders. This has 3 areas: educator preparation, licensure, and licensure discipline. In terms of educator preparation, we are using data to drive program approval decisions. There were 7 comprehensive reviews that occurred in fall 2019 that the department led based on a comprehensive review handbook that includes student outcome data. Those recommendations, based on the results, will come to the board in July of this year. Bullets 2 and 3 will be able to get a little green check mark in 1 week. We are very excited. Erica, our senior research associate, is going full steam ahead toward production of our annual educator preparation report card. We're very excited with what we're seeing in the beta site from our vendor, but we've been working really carefully with the department to ensure that we're using clean, accurate, aligned data, and that it's going to be presented in a much more user-friendly manner. So we're excited to share that with you all next week. In September, we produced a report on strategies of several educator preparation providers across the state that had seen great gains in our report card in recent years, in areas ranging from teacher diversity, teachers being in high demand subject areas, better outcomes on classroom observations, all those kinds of things. And we produced a report that we then shared at the TACD Conference of Colleges of Teacher Education in the fall. And we continue to work with our legislators this session. We work with the Higher Ed Commission, the administration, and educator preparation providers on our policy, law, procedures that relate to educator preparation. Educator licensure. We look forward to continuing to push on ways to encourage more diversity in our classrooms. We do now have authority in statute to develop a policy on educator diversity, and we'll be working with the department and also the Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance to move forward in that direction. One way that we've brought focus to bringing in more diversity for teachers is that it's actually weighted a little bit higher on the report card this year than it has been in prior years. In other words, ed preps can earn more points to get to a more advanced level if they are able to bring in more diverse candidates. We are also looking at our existing licensure assessments. We continue to refine them. One area that we've heard some interest from ed prep providers is how well the new EdTPA performance-based pedagogy assessment, it's kind of like a portfolio system they need to upload, relates to teacher quality when they get in the classroom. We did an initial look at this at 2018 with a few programs that implemented EdTPA ahead of requirements. Erica is going to revisit that data later this spring now that it's a requirement statewide to see whether results on the EdTPA are more predictive of classroom outcomes than they were on the previous assessment that teacher candidates would take. Yes, sir.
This isn't directly necessarily related to this, but just coming off of our luncheon with superintendents.
Sure.
There was just a great concern about the shortage of teachers, especially in rural areas, with the increasing stringency and cost to licensure, and just really looking for ways to create alternate pathways to the classroom, especially for teachers with high skills or former professionals, retirees, engineers, firefighters, for all the different types of schools, and just making that where it is someone who is in the community, they're from that community, they've retired, they want to get back in the community, they want to be a quality teacher, and it's and trying to find an ease of not reducing the expectation, not reducing the quality, but allowing for different ways to arrive at the classroom that gave the superintendents trying to fulfill those spots in areas that don't have a significant amount of people moving there per day. Just giving them access to more flexibility in doing that, just as a consideration.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. I know that the legislature is looking at options like that this session as well. We have a couple programs that exist, one for folks who've taught at the post-secondary level to get a license for high school. One, it's called an adjunct license, which is a little confusing. It's not actually for adjunct professors. It is for folks just in that situation who are maybe retired or coming from another career where they can work part-time for up to 5 years. Currently, there's only one program in the Knoxville area that provides the training needed for that path, but we've had some conversations with the licensure folks at the department about ways to expand that in the future. Did you want to add?
Let me say one other thing to that, too. I got the same comments in my group, and probably everyone did.
Yes.
But I did get a comment that was really interesting from one of the superintendents, and they expressed the concern. They like the idea of bringing these adjuncts in, but a lot of them don't know how to work in a classroom with the students. And so they said, we need to be sure that they at least have the training of how to deal with students. So as we go through this crisis, we need to be sure that we cover that.
This has been, this has been an interesting thread the needle from a legislative perspective and a policy-making perspective, because you want to value the experiences. And at the same time, it's obviously necessary to have an understanding of what is education law and what are my responsibilities under the law as a teacher. What is the teacher code of ethics? What some of Mr. Jensen's constituents were talking about having trouble with ethics in terms of some of the new folks that came out of EPPs, and they're kind of having to train up the new employees on that. So there's always a lot into it, and this isn't new by any stretch of the imagination. She mentioned the former higher education process. That law was passed in 2010 or 2011. And, this board changed some of the requirements around that to actuate it a little more to where it can be effective. But there are a number of paths that exist that are simply just, maybe not all that well known.
Yes, Mr. Ferguson.
I'd just like to echo what we've just been discussing, what we heard with the meeting with the superintendents earlier. But I also heard a great deal about the difficulty it is for teachers from bordering states or states in close proximity wanting to come into Tennessee, but the licensure requirements are stricter, I think, than other states around us. So I believe that's also being addressed. I know we've talked about it here, but it seems like we're having a hard time getting that kind of a lot of traction there.
Well, and it's, looking more into this, and there's a lot of folks here that know more about this issue than I do. There's some provisions of the law that talk about our agreements with other states. But there are very few states in the union that actually have just a blanket reciprocity. Because remember, these standards are different in every place, and so there's not too many states around. I think what we found about four or five that actually had sort of the blanket reciprocity. One of the folks again, Mr. Jensen's constituents was saying, hey, if I'm a doctor in Kentucky, would I have to go through a different set of tests to become a doctor here? But ultimately, the business of the education profession is very much a province of the state, and licensing and deciding what that looks like is very much a province of the legislature and the State Board of Education, the various states.
And our last area in Great Teachers and Leaders refers to what we've talked about already today, making sure that we have committed ethical professionals in front of our students every day, and where we need to, taking action to ensure that. In terms of educator licensure discipline, our goals are ongoing and on track. Brittany, our Assistant General Counsel, has sent out a biannual licensure update to board members last July and this past January. These will continue to make sure you all are up to date on the board's licensure caseload and trends that the staff are encountering. The legal team has continued extensive outreach to school districts regarding their reporting responsibilities to make sure we receive all of the information that we need to. That includes presentations to the metropolitan area school systems, superintendent study councils, days in the district, TSBA's legislative conference, and upcoming presentations to the Association of School Personnel Administrators. So lots and lots of outreach. We've also requested and happily are in the governor's budget several new positions for our legal team, which will allow even more outreach. I know that they have as a goal to reach out to not just public school districts, but also charter school operators, private school organizations, make sure that everybody who works with students and educators is aware of these requirements. Work is always ongoing in case review to make sure that it's as streamlined as possible, and the team always works with the department to make sure that they're getting information in T-Encompass in an accurate and timely way. Questions on priority area 2? Priority area 3 is around high-quality school options. We will advance policies to support all students having access to high-quality schools. There are really 2 main areas in this bucket of work. Charter school authorization. As you know, our board currently does have 3 authorized charter schools that are in operation. Whilst these responsibilities will transition to the Charter School Commission in the future, we are committed to ensuring that these schools have the best experience possible throughout that transition. We continue, and we have some workshop presentations in just a moment from Tess and Allie with updates on our authorized charter schools' progress, how they have done over the past academic year, how they're doing in terms of our performance framework, and that will be shared with the board very shortly. The board has also published its annual authorized charter school report online by the required deadlines. Those are available for your review and also will be discussed shortly. And by June the 1st, there's a goal to develop a plan to transition the responsibility of our authorized charter schools to the newly established Charter School Commission. Our staff meet regularly with our partners at the DOE to support the commission being set up. They presented at a webinar last month to get the commission up to speed on background responsibilities of authorizing charter schools, the board's role, and our current responsibilities. And as the commission forms, we're going to continue to build out that plan and determine what supports look like in that area. Questions so far? And you will hear more from our charter school experts momentarily. The second area here is around rules and policies regarding school options. The work is ongoing in terms of course access program and other virtual and e-learning policies. We currently have a little bit of a hodgepodge at the board. We have an e-learning policy from 2006. We have some virtual learning requirements and rule. We have the new course access rule that the legislature established in recent years. And one of our goals is to bring coherence to those systems so that students who are taking advantage of online course options are ensured with a high quality experience regardless of what type of provider they go through. In terms of our authorizer evaluation framework, that work is in progress and on track. Our charter team has been working closely with SchoolWorks, which is a contracted organization, on the authorizer evaluation development. We've conducted surveys and focus groups in the fall with both charter school operators and authorizers to inform the authorizer evaluations. And we've had 2 meetings of a small group that has representatives from those bodies to begin the development of the system. Our charter team plans to present the rule on first reading in July 2020 and pilot with 3 authorizers in the fall of 2020. They expect the rule and the system to be fully implemented and operational with the 21-22 school year. Along those lines, in terms of approving our state board rules for the timeline and process of charter school amendment petitions and appeals, we are going to be talking about one of those tomorrow. This process is in progress and on track. The permanent rule on amendment petitions and appeals is set to be effective this spring, and the state board staff will work with the department to develop the application and rubric for amendment petitions, and that will be presented to the board for approval. One area that we'll be focusing on in the spring is working with the department to redesign and approve a charter renewal process aligned with quality authorizing standards. We look forward to working with newly hired staff at the department to develop that renewal application and to make changes from previous iterations. And as we think about authorizer evaluations, we look forward to making sure the application and process are aligned to quality authorizing standards and how authorizers will be evaluated moving forward. And finally, one area that is complete is to develop and approve rules for implementing the education savings accounts in accordance with timelines set forth in law. And we appreciate the collaborative work of our partners at the Department of Ed and other stakeholders. Those rules will go into effect on the 25th of this month after receiving a positive recommendation from the Joint Government Operations Committee in January. Okay. And our fourth area, Nathan will lead on.
Sure. So this is our strategic priority of public engagement and oversight. We commit to collaborative governments, effective oversight, and engagement with Tennessee citizens. This gets back actually to one of the main purposes that the State Board of Education in its modern iteration was created back in 1984. So how can a board that creates rules and policies ensure that they're being effective without continual review, without checking back to see that they're functioning properly? That's one of the main points that this gets to. Our responsibilities given to us by the General Assembly are to oftentimes fill in under the law what they give us, to create the rules under the framework that they put in place. So what does that call for? For your staff, it means ensuring that independent research informs decisions in those policies and rules, to be able to check it out from more than one place, so that each of you are satisfied in your conscience that you're making the best decision that you can. Provide oversight through routinely reviewing and discussing all board policies and rules. Again, when we look back through, and of course your staff has really done some good work on this in the last couple of years especially, to go through and find those old provisions that need to be taken out. And of course the next step with all of that is to say, with what needs to stay in, is it being faithfully executed, and where could it be improved? And providing oversight through an inventory of how our partners at TDOE monitor districts for compliance with the rules and with the policies that you all create. Each of these is necessary for an effective oversight body. This process calls for openness and communication with these officials, but also to the people to whom they answer. It's one of the reasons that you all have each spent so much time in your districts, spending time that isn't close to your home, taking time off of work and going and meeting not only with educators, but with the people, right? And so also want to call out Faith Christian, who's serving as our policy fellow this session. She's actually with me this half of the year, and she did some great research on ESL program policies and proposed changes. That's one example of some independent research done by your staff. This will likely be the substance of many ongoing conversations. That is said, the portion of providing oversight through routinely reviewing and discussing all board policies. That is going to be the substance of many ongoing conversations, as we are responsible for creating rules in the K-12 sphere. Routinely revisiting each of those is extremely important if we are to be effective. Also, we'd want to mention that in terms of the inventory, and there in bullet point 4, TDOE Office of School Approval is working on this and plans to present at our July 2020 board meeting. So with that, I think we're going to...
Excuse me, a question before we move on. Maybe.
Sure. Yes, sir.
How often do we actually review every policy or rule? Do we have? I think of Calumet Farms in Kentucky when they're painting the fence there. And by the time they get out, I think it's like a 2-year process. By the time they get around, it's time to start painting it again.
Yep.
So how often do we?
We don't stop painting the fence.
I understand that, but how long does it take us to make one loop?
We have so it's a two-part answer. We have a 2-year audit cycle where either somebody on our staff or a content expert at the Department of Ed reviews every rule and policy either each year or every other year for relevance, modernity, alignment with statute, all those kinds of things. That had been in process up through 2016 through 2018 when Public Chapter 929 of 2018 passed and said that many things that were previously in policy needed to be moved into rule. So we've pushed pause on our audit cycle right now so we can move everything that we need to from policy into rule, that's honestly had the effect of forcing us to do an audit because we have to look at each policy and see what needs to move. But as soon as we have that process set in place, which should be this calendar year, everything's where it needs to be, then we'll hit reset on our 2-year audit cycle.
So our next piece is board member engagement. This is well known to each of you. This includes hosting our days in the district to develop and maintain relationships with key folks throughout your congressional districts. I also want to say thank you to each of you that have gone and visited days in the district in your neighbor's district. This has been very, very helpful. Because while you all do represent one congressional district each, yet there are none of you that don't represent everything from Memphis to Mountain City, and you've taken that very seriously. The other area we get into is how do we make certain that your voices are heard, not only in your official capacity when you decide to pass a rule or you pass a policy, but also in your individual capacities as public officials. So one of the things that we want to say thank you to each of you about is the op-eds that we've gotten published. They've included Elisa, you've done one most recently. Mr. Cobbins, you've taken that on with special education. Mr. Ferguson, with workforce development. Every time you all make your voice heard, Mr. Eby, and of course Chairman Hartgrove, all of you have participated in this. Every time you make your voice heard, it provides a unique way for you to connect with other folks in the education sphere, but also to remind all Tennesseans that the work you are after and this business of the State Board of Education is one of the things that binds the state together. So whether you're in education or you're not in education, if you have children or you don't have children, everything we do on this board affects how Tennesseans live. And it's very good for the public to hear from you directly. So this also is about continuing to maintain your relationships between you and your individual legislative delegations. This board, as it exists now, is a creation of the General Assembly. And it was designed to make sure that there was a place for responsiveness, a place for the people's voice to be directly involved in making policy and rule. And I'm pleased to say that you all, for our 2 new board members, each of them went on a tour in their districts to meet with key legislators prior to January. And the year before that, to have met with 26 of the 30 incoming freshman members of the General Assembly in their districts, to take that time and to be committed to that partnership is proven most useful because we don't operate in a vacuum. We operate in the legal structure that they put in place. So the other let's see, I'm sorry, I think I've covered what I need to cover there. Yep.
I'll finish us out really quickly. Just as a reminder, we will be resetting our strategic plan goals and our master plan in July. The steps to get there will be that in April, we'll send all members draft strategic goals and a draft master plan based on all those stakeholder interviews our consultant conducted in December 2019. We'll work with you one-on-one over the course of the late spring, early summer to refine those priorities and revise drafts. And in July, we'll share the accomplishments of the full 2019-20 master plan and our strategic goals and master plan moving forward. Any questions?
Mr. Eby.
So we're finishing up 2015 to 2020.
Yes.
I won't ask you this question now, but I will ask you at the next board meeting. What I'd like is an assessment of how we did against those goals that we set in 2015.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and those goals were to have an average ACT score of 21 or higher, to be in the top half of states on NAEP, and to have at least 50% of graduates of the class of 2020 going on to some form of post-secondary or certificate program. So we will have that data for you in July. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman,
Yes,
before we
Mr.
move on, may I have
Yes,
comment?
Mr. Jensen.
I am struggling with being fully here at this meeting because of the last meetings we had. Just, I've got a page of cryptic notes here that took down with furiously. I really would like to hear, not at this meeting, but maybe we could do this in a written form, what other members heard, and to see where the commonality is there, to see if there's things that we need to address. And I heard several things there. I won't go into them now, but I just think that that's our constituency there. And if we're not responsive to them, then we lose our credibility. And
There's no
I would
question.
really like for us to think how we reflect what each of us heard, and then put it into some commonality and see where it overlaps or whatever. I don't know how we do that, and I know that's probably a major task, but it just seems like that's one place that we could spend some time well worth the effort.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's one thing to meet with people and ask their opinion, but then to not do something with that information would be a travesty, and I think it would be a detriment to our reputation if we didn't act on that. Whether we're able to actually make the types of changes that were recommended and suggested, that still we would need to do that homework. And I think I would certainly ask Amy for you to take that lead role in determining the best way to go about gathering the information, because I know I was writing fast and furiously. We were getting a lot of great data. It was difficult to stop the conversations, but the time was up, so we had to. So we will be gathering those notes through Amy Owen. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you.
Additionally, anything else? Okay. All right. Let's look back at this agenda. Good discussion and a great update on our master plan. Charter school presentations, annual authorizer report, authorizer evaluation updates, and Nashville Classical Charter School appeal.
Yes, good afternoon, board members. Allie Gaffey with the State Board Deputy Director of Charter Schools, and I am presenting first our Charter School Annual Report. This annual report is with regard to our 2018-19 school year and our authorized charter schools for our district. So the annual report on our charter schools performance is published every year for two primary reasons. One being that it's required by state law, and all authorizers in the state are required to submit this type of report. And then secondly, it aligns with our state authorizing standards, which state that a quality authorizer provides a written report to each school and publicizes it for transparency. A quick recap of our schools. We currently have 3 authorized charter schools in operation. 2 of those we're going to speak in more depth today. Bluff City High School first opened in 2017, and it has currently approximately 415 students, serving students in grades 9 through 11th. Our second school is Kip Antioch College Prep Elementary, and it has approximately 287 students in both grades kindergarten and first. And then our third school, Kip Antioch College Prep Middle, opened this past August with approximately 132 fifth grade students. And from an enrollment perspective, all 3 of our schools are meeting their enrollment targets outlined in their charter agreements. At our last quarterly meeting, you all voted to approve the new 2 charter school applications, one being Beacon College Prep in Memphis, and a second one, Rocket Ship Nashville number 3. So given that both of these schools are located in a district with at least one priority school, your vote to approve came with a 30-day reconciliation period between the local district and the school. So during this period, Shelby County Schools and the sponsors of Beacon College Prep mutually agreed for the school to open as part of a school of Shelby County. And so therefore, the school will not be under the state board's authorization. And we're really thrilled for Shelby County and for Beacon College Prep and look forward to the opening of their school this August. And the second one, Rocket Ship Nashville number 3, that was the second one that you voted to approve in November and will remain under our authorization as MNPS and Rocket Ship did not mutually agree during this reconciliation period. So because we are transitioning all of our schools to the Public Charter School Commission in July of 2021, and this school is scheduled to open in August of 2021, the State Board will support the school through its pre-opening process before transitioning the authorizing responsibilities to the Commission. So as part of our authorizing requirements, the state board annually evaluates each of its charter schools using our performance framework. And the performance framework has 3 categories that it focuses on: academic performance, financial performance, and organizational performance. And while we are currently operating 3 schools, the remainder of this presentation will focus on Bluff City High School and Kip Antioch College Prep Elementary, as they were the only 2 schools in operation during the 18-19 school year. So we'll start with speaking on Bluff City High School. So starting off with academic performance, Bluff City High School was evaluated in these 3 broad categories. Student achievement, this is the most heavily weighted bucket of this section, and it's primarily driven by proficiency rates on TN Ready, TVOS, and chronic absenteeism. The second bucket we'll look at is how the school performed on TN Ready when compared to the district that it's located in. And so for Bluff County, or Bluff City, that is Shelby County. And the third bucket we look at is how the school is doing on indicators within school culture. So when we established the 3 thresholds, or these thresholds for the performance in each category, we analyzed currently available data, as well as data of the districts and the state that the state board can authorize in order to ensure that we're setting a high but attainable bar for performance. And since the board has schools in operation in both Shelby County and Metro Nashville, it's important that we set out a performance framework that will work for any school regardless of its location. So as we utilize the performance framework and continue to collect data on our schools, and from a district and state perspective, we're committed to evaluating the thresholds to ensure that we're not just setting our standards too high or too low, but just right, and for all schools in our portfolio. So the indicators under the first bucket of academic performance is student academic achievement, and this showed mixed results for Bluff City. First, we can see that the overall rates of on-track or mastered in TN Ready show the school fell far below expectations for performance in ELA and math, specifically on their 4 tested subject areas last year, which was English 1 and English 2, Algebra 1, and Geometry. However, you can also see, as indicated in the change from 2017-18 column, that both ELA and math scores are improvements from last year and therefore are represented in green. When it comes to growth, this school exceeded the standard for TVOS growth with a second year in a row scoring a level 5. And this is a really strong indicator of the early work that this school is doing to continually move students who are coming in from very far behind. And thirdly, the school's chronic absenteeism rate receives a falls far below and is higher percentage from last year's results. So given that we want to see this score lowering or decreasing, this comparison point is shown in red to represent this negative or undesirable trend from last year. So we know that high school chronic absenteeism is a challenge, not just for our school, but across the state. And we also know that this is a continued area of focus for the school. And for context, grades 9 through 12 last year across all of Shelby County had a 30.4% chronically absent rate. The indicators in the second academic bucket look at how the school performed in comparison to the school district. And in the case for Bluff City, the school earned a meet standard for ELA comparison to the performance of Shelby County schools, and it does not meet in math. In terms of school culture, we see that the out-of-school suspension rate for Bluff City in 18-19 was a 12.2%, which is a decrease from last year, but still achieving a falls far below rating. And then, as a point of reference, Shelby County's suspension rate for all students from that same year was 12.5%. The student attrition category looks at the percentage of students who left the school for any reason between October 1st, 2018 and October 1st, 2019. So at 24%, the school just makes the meet standard rating here, which is another improvement from last year. And thirdly, the teacher retention rate looks at the number of teachers returning to the school for an academic year. This indicator is particularly sensitive to a very small N count with just 2 grade levels of teachers last year. We saw an increase of 4%, but we are still at the does not meet rating because of this small N count. Based on the weighting of each bucket, in the overall academic performance section, the school received a does not meet the standard. And last summer, the staff met with the school leadership team to discuss these results. We also recently had a check-in conversation with the school to talk about their progress, and we will be further discussing that during our site visit this month of what they've done so far and what they intend to do for the remainder of the school year. So next we'll talk about KIPP Antioch College Prep Elementary, their academic results from 18-19.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm glad you're meeting with them to find out why they, I mean, some of these, they're making progress, but obviously not the kind of progress we would like to see overall. But some of them, they didn't make progress. So just meeting with them, how are we encouraging them, or what are we doing to help them improve those numbers?
So a lot of those conversations really also align to our LEA plan and the school plans that they create as a result of that. So they've set goals specific to how they performed last year to this year. So it's not just having a conversation, it's also checking in on the goals and hearing what strategies they're using, and then providing them any resources that we have or connecting them to resources as we think can be beneficial for them as well.
So are you also, we visited Wright School today. And Wright School, they were telling us their chronic absenteeism rate has dropped, like 5% or something like that, and they're up to 94.2%. So from a lessons learned, what are they doing that maybe Bluff City could do? Are we sharing that data and giving them specific things that they might do to try and increase that?
Yes, we definitely are trying to connect them to as many of those types of success stories as we know of. And I also know that Bluff City just completed, and we'll hear about this month at our site visit, just completed their own analysis of both like schools surrounding them as well as parents to try to get to the deeper root cause of what's happening with their chronic absenteeism, since they have a lot of systems in place, but they have not seen that change, that positive change yet. So they're doing some additional research, and we are really looking forward to hearing what the results of that are and then what they will make changes to because of it. But I think that's a great idea as well. Perhaps we even connect them to Wright Middle School.
And maybe Shelby County as a whole, if it's got a 30%, they could use something like that too. Thank you.
Mr. Morrow?
Just a question on, if you sat with us in the confirmation hearings and watched the dialogue with the Charter School Commission that's going to be coming on board, I mean, the Charter School Commission was very adamant about we're not looking for schools that are just a little bit better. And for schools that are significantly better. So my question is just like, what is the timelines that schools that have admittedly real hard challenges in front of them that are doing a lot of work to try to figure out solutions to that, but what are the timelines that are kind of standard that they get to prove enough growth year over year before there's more significant intervention?
Sure. So one of the next steps that we'll talk about here at the end of this is the intervention process that we have. So we do have a process that we follow depending on how schools are performing in all three of our categories. And we have had those conversations move to a first step, at least, with Bluff City with regard to their academic results. But we also know that there's a lot of work to be done, and what we're really encouraged by is seeing that the school is making growth. So for 2 years in a row, they have a TVOS of a level 5, and that's significant considering that their students are coming in. That just shows how far behind their students are coming in at the high school level. So while they're not the scores that we would like to see, we are really encouraged by the fact that they are showing this growth too. Okay. So with KIPP Antioch College Prep, this past October, we visited and joined in the celebration of their ribbon cutting ceremony for this beautiful new building where both of our KIPP Antioch middle and elementary schools are housed with plenty of space to grow. And I know that some of you were able to join in that celebration, and it really was a great way to celebrate the elementary school's first successful year and then the opening of the middle school. So I did want to call that out in this presentation too. So last year being the elementary school's first year and only serving kindergarten students, we didn't have a tremendous amount of academic data to score them on because they do not participate in the TN Ready assessment and they do not have growth data to compare across years. So we still evaluated the school in these same 3 broad categories, but with fewer different indicators. So we decided to, or we opted to choose, to weigh all 3 of these categories the same to make it the most fair way to score them considering they had such few data points. So in terms of student achievement, the only indicator we had here was chronic absenteeism. And as you can see, the school has shown incredible results. This is a real strength for this school and is something that their team is incredibly intentional about ensuring that students are at school every day. And again, as another point of context comparison for Metro Nashville, K through 8, their percentage of chronic absenteeism is an average of 11.6. Because the school did not participate in state assessments, there's no data under that second bucket. But the third bucket under academic performance is on school culture. And under this metric, the school saw a low suspension rate of 3.3%, which has the school achieving a meets the standard rating. And in comparison, Metro Nashville's suspension rate for all grades was 9.3%. With regard to student attrition, the school exceeds the standard here with only 11.8 student attrition rate. And then the third one, the teacher retention, is another low end count with only 1 grade level of teachers. And so while the majority of the teachers did return to the school, having so few teachers not return, and so few teachers overall, that the school did receive a does not meet rating here.
Do you know the average attrition rate for the area, for the district, to compare that 11.8% to?
I do not know that.
Get it, let me know.
Yes. The overall academic rating for the elementary school is a meet standard for 1819 with all of these buckets that we just discussed. And similar to what we did with the high school, we did meet with them this last month, talking about their plans, the progress that they've made on their school improvement plan, and then we'll be subbing into their school for our annual site visit this month to continue that conversation of how they've been doing this year and how they will close out the school year. And then we'll have an end of year meeting over the summer to discuss their next or this current year's results. So the next few slides here represent both schools combined. It's their financial and organizational frameworks for 1819, and you'll notice that the scores here are not finalized, and that's because we've just received both schools' financial audits, and we have our financial consultant processing those. So once we have those results this spring, we will be adding that in to the ratings and republishing our annual report with the final results. Both schools have the same scores for these sections, so that's why they're combined. And we'll start with the financial performance. Again, with the exception of enrollment variance, all of these figures come from the audit, so they are still pending. But both schools are meeting the standard in terms of their enrollment variance indicator, and the final scores for this section will be added this spring. And then the organizational performance framework, it's a bit of a catch-all here where we're looking for compliance and fidelity to the charter agreement, as well as the school's responsibilities under state and federal law. So these are items we're looking at and reviewing as part of our monthly monitoring, and including our reporting calendar, our check-in calls with our school-based personnel on special populations, and our annual site visit. So since there are a few indicators that come from this audit, this one is also not complete just yet. So to wrap up here, the overall ratings for 1819 for Bluff City is presented here with a does not meet for academic performance and financial and organizational pending. And then for KIPP Elementary, a meet standard for academic and financial and organizational pending as well. So in terms of, oh yes.
You said that you combined both schools from a financial standpoint. That's just an artifact that they both came out the same. I mean, you evaluate them separately, yes, and that's what you'll do in the future.
That is literally just for our presentation purposes. But yes, they have their own reports. So in terms of next steps, we have to finalize the annual report with those financial performance ratings this spring, to implement any intervention in accordance with our policy, our intervention policy, should any performance deficiencies be realized and necessary. And then our annual site visits, as I've discussed, are happening this month and in March. And we will wrap up the school year in July with our schools, hosting or meeting with them to talk about their end of the school year performance. So any other questions on our annual report? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Tess for an update on authorizer evaluations.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tess Stovall, Director of Charter Schools with the State Board of Education. Amy went through at a high level some of the work that we've been doing on authorizer evaluations, but I did want to take just a few minutes to go a little bit deeper with the board and preview some work that's going to be coming down the road for you all, because this is a brand new piece of work for us. It's going to, I think, really be a game changer in the state when it comes to authorizer quality. And so I want to share with you the work that we've been doing, as well as let you know the timeline moving forward. So this charge for the state board came under Public Chapter 219 of the 2019 General Assembly session. And so what the statutory charge says is that the state board shall ensure the effective operation of authorizers in the state and shall evaluate authorizer quality periodically. And then an authorizer's failure to remedy noncompliance may result in a reduction of authorizer fee. So currently authorizers in the state may collect, I'm specifically talking about our local districts here, may collect up to a 3% authorizer fee or $35,000 per school. And so if an authorizer is failing to remedy that noncompliance, the state board can ultimately reduce that authorizer fee collection. All authorizers in the state will be evaluated. So that includes our 4 school districts that are currently authorizers, as well as our statewide entities, so the Achievement School District and the future Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. As Amy mentioned, the state board has been working since the fall with a group called SchoolWorks on developing this evaluation system. SchoolWorks has worked with 2 other states that have implemented authorizer evaluations to date, and that's Minnesota and Ohio. Tennessee will actually only be the 4th state in the nation to implement authorizer evaluation, so we are very much on the forefront of this work. So in October, the state board and SchoolWorks conducted a survey of all stakeholders in this space. So that included operators, authorizers, other groups who are involved in the charter movement. We also conducted virtual focus groups to really get a sense of understanding of the current authorizing standards in the state. In December and in January, we held longer training sessions and work sessions with a smaller group of stakeholders, representation from authorizers and charter school groups, to dig into the evaluation process more deeply. So based on that input, as well as national best practice, I wanted to go ahead and share some of the elements that are beginning to form around authorizer evaluations. First, the stakeholders group has determined that they think authorizer evaluations should happen for an authorizer every 2 years, and that a cohort of 3 authorizers would be evaluated annually by the state board. In the year that an authorizer is not be evaluated, that they would complete an annual self-assessment based on the rubric and would be including that self-assessment as a part of the annual report that they're required to produce. Evaluations are going to be based on an authorizer's % alignment to our quality standards, which are currently in state board policy, and that there would be thresholds set for alignment for exemplary authorizing, satisfactory authorizing, unsatisfactory authorizing, etc. That evaluations would be primarily based on documentation, but would also be informed by both surveys of school leaders and in-person interviews with authorizing staff. Evaluations will be facilitated by state board staff and would include some external evaluators in that process.
So Tess, with,
Yes.
with the self-assessment, if there's something that bubbles up or is reflected within that self-assessment, that there's an area of concern, would that trigger an earlier review of that particular?
So that is something that we're still working through, and I would actually, the preview is our March 6th Charter School Subcommittee is going to go in deeper here, and one of the pieces of feedback we'd like for discussion is what are those intervention actions? I think certainly what we would want to see on that self-assessment is if an authorizer is evaluated and does not meet the standard in a particular section, that on that next year's evaluation, we would want to hear and see progress towards that. Meeting that standard. I think what's to be determined and want to hear input from the board is what are those thresholds? What happens if an authorizer is in the lowest category regarding unsatisfactory? What sort of corrective actions? Could that mean that you're evaluated in 1 year instead of 2 years? That's still up for conversation and something that I would love additional input on as we move forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Outstanding questions. As we've discussed, I mean, we are still very much deep in the development stage here. So I wanted to share some of the top line things that we are still discussing as a team, as well as with our stakeholders. The first is simple but meaningful. When do you cut off documentation submission? I think if anyone has been a part of federal monitoring from a district perspective, from the Department of Education, there is an opportunity after you are monitored to supplement the information. If it's like, oh, well, we had this agenda, here's additional information to prove that it happened. I think what we're thinking right now is as a part of the pilot, we would have a cutoff for documentation. There would not be additional opportunity to resubmit, but that's still up for some conversation and debate. Who is the school leader that we are interviewing? Particularly for our charter management organizations, is that the executive director? Is that the principal? These are things that we need to determine before the evaluation happens. What are the corrective actions that would be triggered? How quickly would you move to a reduction in an authorizer fee? And I think most importantly, particularly for our team, is what is the staff and resource capacity needed to do this work? And that will be a particular focus from our pilot work this fall, is determining that moving forward.
Question.
Yes.
Question. So if I recall correctly, the maximum authorizer fee they can get is like $35,000?
That's correct.
So one is, how would you decide how much you're going to reduce it?
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, if you took it all, that's $35,000. What is the annual budget, say, for Metro Nashville or Shelby? $35,000, I presume, is not a large percentage of that.
It's important to know it's $35,000 per school. So it's a district like Metro Nashville, which I think has 28 charter schools, give or take. I mean, that's upwards of $1 million that are being collected from an authorizer.
Oh, so they lose the authorizer fee for every charter school?
That is, we have to determine that. Or is it a threshold, right? If you are here, we're going to reduce it by X amount, or, I think that's a part of the conversation. Is that, or is it a full reduction? Is it a graduated reduction? Certainly for Shelby County, when you have 55 plus charter schools, that's a significant amount of money. Another note is that authorizers had to turn in their authorizer fee reports of how they use that authorizer fee recently to the Department of Education. So again, another plug for our March 6th subcommittee is we're going to be digging into those reports. So a lot to learn from that as well. So the last thing I just wanted to share with you all is timeline for implementation and when you can expect to hear more on this work. At the July 2020 meeting, we will be bringing the authorizer evaluation rule in front of the state board for first reading. Then we are conducting a pilot authorizer evaluation for 2 to 3 authorizers this fall. In particular, I'm a big believer in you got to try it first and learn, and then we're going to bring those revisions in February to the rule based on learnings via our pilot. And then we would expect that the authorizer rule would be effective August of 2021, with the 2021-22 school year being the first actual round of evaluations that have stakes involved. So any questions on that work thus far?
Well, this is the evaluation. Yeah. Do you want to pose your question? Because
when does the Charter Commission take over?
So they begin hearing appeals in January of 2021.
Okay.
and they will take over the authorizer responsibilities in July 2021. So this will coincide with.
That's what I want to do. This
Yes.
coincides with that process.
Yes,
Okay.
I certainly think we are already thinking about our staff capacity for this coming fall, because we will still be hearing appeals and we will be conducting this pilot evaluation as well. So figuring out the timeline for that will be important.
And just looking at the evaluation process, what have you estimated the staffing needs would be when you're doing that?
So right now, we are expecting to have a team of 3 doing each evaluation. So if we're currently trying to think about how would we stagger that out throughout a fall or a couple of months, because it's going to be a pretty intense document review process, then interviews, and then actually writing the report. So I think when an evaluation is happening, it is going to be the exclusive focus of those staff from a capacity standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And the last presentation from me is regarding the charter school appeal that we have received and that you all will be voting on tomorrow. This is from Nashville Classical Charter School, and it is your first amendment appeal that you are going to be hearing. So we want to ground ourselves in the statutory charge with regard to amendment appeals. So 4913.110D allows the governing board of a charter school to petition an authorizer to amend their charter agreement. Timelines for the approval and appeal process for those decisions will be determined by the state board. So in the case of Nashville Classical Charter School, Metro Nashville Public Schools denied the amendment petition request by the school based on fiscal impact and MNPS school capacity in that area. The state board's process in an amendment appeal ran similar to how we've previously run our appeal processes. So upon receipt of the appeal, the state board staff collected additional documentation from Nashville Classical and the district regarding the decision, held a public hearing on January 13th and accepted both written and public comment, and we conducted a complete review of the entire record. In the case of an amendment appeal, the state board standard of review is that in order to overturn a local board's decision to to deny a charter amendment petition, we're not revoking in this case, the state board must find that the local board's decision to deny the charter petition was contrary to the best interests of the students, the LEA, or the community. So this is your best interest standard as opposed to a narrower standard in other appeals that you've received. So here, the recommendation from the executive director is that based on the procedural history, the findings of fact, and the analysis of the issues, the executive director of the state board believes that the decision not to approve the charter amendment petition was contrary to the best interests of students, the LEA, and the community. Therefore, Dr. Morrison is recommending that the state board overturn the decision of MNPS and remand the decision back to MNPS with written instructions to approve the amendment. It's important to note here that in this case, Metro Nashville would remain the authorizer. The state board would not become the authorizer of the school. We allowed each party to submit a statement in response to the recommendation. We received a statement from Metro Nashville Public Schools, and the State Board General Counsel, Angie Sanders, is going to read that statement, and then I will go into more details regarding the appeal.
Sorry about that delay. My name is Angie Sanders. I'm the General Counsel for the State Board of Education. This is the statement submitted by the Metro Nashville Public Schools Board of Education. The Board for Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools urges the State Board of Education to uphold the MNPS Board's decision to deny the charter amendment to Nashville Classical. As noted by the Executive Director, the decision by the local board should be upheld unless the local board acted contrary to the best interests of the students, LEA, or community. The decision by the MNPS Board should not be overturned because reasonable minds could disagree. In other words, a decision is not contrary solely because there are other options available. Courts have interpreted contrary to mean opposite in character or
or nature or mutually opposed. See Williams versus Taylor. And there's a citation in that you all can read in your materials. Here, the board's decision does not conflict with the best interests of MMPS students. While Nashville Classical satisfied the criteria set forth, the board is also obligated to consider the district as a whole when approving charter amendments. As noted by the executive director, there is a negative fiscal impact to the district if this expansion is approved. Also, there's a footnote there that you all can read through in your materials. Moreover, while 2 of the zone schools are listed as priority schools, they are showing progressive growth in TVOS scores. Performance data demonstrates measured TVOS growth from average to above average in both math and ELA for most schools. In math, 4 schools scored a 3 and 1 school scored a 5. In ELA, 1 school scored a 4 and 2 schools scored a 5. This data demonstrates forward progress with zone schools increasingly meeting the academic needs of the students served. Most importantly, there's an abundance of capacity in the area. Several board members described the area as saturated with charters and voiced concern that expanding charters in light of the capacity of the zone schools would be a further detriment to those zone schools. In closing, the Board for Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools asks that the State Board of Education not follow the Executive Director's recommendation. Instead, for the reasons set forth at the board meeting on November 26, 2019, and based on the entire record, the Metro Nashville Public School Board requests that the Nashville Classical Charter Amendment be denied. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to move into more detail regarding this amendment appeal. So from a background context, Nashville Classical Charter School opened in the 2013-14 school year, serving kindergarten students. In the current school year we're in right now, it serves grades kindergarten through 6th. The school submitted an amendment petition letter of intent on July 30th to its authorizer, MNPS, and on October 1st submitted the application to the district. On November 12th, the MNPS Office of Charter Schools recommended to the local Board of Education that the amendment petition be approved. The local Board of Education requested additional fiscal impact information prior to voting on the amendment petition. At the November 26, 2019 board meeting, the Office of Charter Schools again recommended approval of this amendment petition and presented the additional fiscal information that had been requested. The local board then voted to deny the amendment petition up for the school. As a part of our appeal process, we always look at alignment to quality authorizing standards. In this case, we found that the Nashville MNPS Office of Charter Schools had created an amendment petition application to use for schools to use when applying for an amendment. They clearly communicated in that template the performance requirements necessary for a school to attempt to amend their charter agreement, as well as a focus on high academic, operational, and financial results to merit expansion of a charter. Additionally, the Office of Charter Schools recommended approval of amendments that met the high bar for academic, operational, and financial results. So that those processes that the Office of Charter Schools performed did align to our quality authorizing standards. So at this point, any discussions or questions before I move into the analysis of the appeal and the recommendation?
Mr. Jensen?
Can you give a little more facts on this school? How
Sure.
big it is, where it is,
And
and what the expansion looks like in terms
Yes.
of numbers?
How about this? Let me go through the next couple slides. I think it's going to answer
Okay.
your question, and then we're
Thank
going to. Okay. So under the first reason for denying the school that Metro Nashville used was fiscal impact of the amendment petition. So in the amendment petition, the school was asking for an additional 72 seats to serve up to 527 students. So currently it's sitting at right around 450, maybe a little below, which is its current maximum enrollment capacity. So MNPS estimated that approving this amendment request would cost MNPS about $390,000 a year, as the BEP per pupil would follow the students that would be attending the school. Nashville Classical does reside in a Metro Nashville building, in East Nashville, and it is paying Metro Nashville approximately $500,000 per year in rent for this facility. It was named a reward school in the 2018-19 school year. And for the past 3 years, and this is based on data presented to the MNPS Board of Education by the Office of Charter Schools, the school has outperformed both the district and the state in both ELA and math on TN Ready. It has a very high percentage of students who attend the school that are considered in the state's super subgroup, so economically disadvantaged minority students, and that subgroup has outperformed both the district and the state in ELA and math performance. So based on these facts, we determined that Nashville Classical is clearly a high-performing school. It is serving a high-need population. The school's performance has exceeded expectations, outperforms the district and the state, and it met the MNPS's Office of Charter Schools bar for approval, and ultimately the Office of Charter Schools recommended this school's amendment petition be approved. And while certainly we acknowledge that students attending this school get followed by their BEP per pupil funds, the costs of this amendment petition are offset by the $500,000 that are paid in rent annually by the school to MNPS. The second reason for denial cited by MNPS was school capacity in the area. So what we found was that public schools in the area of East Nashville that Nashville Classical is located are under capacity. But we also found that 2 of those 3 zone schools are currently on the priority list and score well below Nashville Classical. We also determined, based on information provided by Nashville Classical, that their students are coming from across the city of Nashville, and they also are receiving a high demand in their applications. They noted that they received 8 applications for every 1 seat, and they have seen very low attrition over their years of operation, which has actually led to them meeting their enrollment capacity quicker than they anticipated. We also determined that a high number of the students actually come from a very high populated area of Nashville, which is the Antioch area. So certainly only exclusively looking at the area around the school in terms of student capacity is not a foregone conclusion that any student would return back to one of those 3 zone schools. And if the amendment petition is not approved, Nashville Classical will have to drastically either reduce their enrollment in their kindergarten class in order to meet that capacity, or not be able to serve 7th and 8th grade, which is currently approved in their charter agreement. So based on the analysis of these facts, we determined that Nashville Classical, again, is a high-performing school, is in high demand, as well as relatively low-performing traditional public schools in the area. The majority of Nashville Classical students are coming from areas outside of Nashville, East Nashville, so it's not a foregone conclusion that those students would return back to those neighborhood schools. And again, not approving the amendment petition could have a devastating impact on the school and the families that it currently serves. So again, the recommendation from the executive director is that because Nashville Classical is a high-performing charter school, looking to expand so that it can serve its current student population through 8th grade, the Office of Charter Schools in Metro Nashville recommended approval of the amendment petition. It is clear demand from the student population that the executive director recommends that the state board overturn the decision of Metro Nashville Public Schools and remand that decision back to MNPS with written instructions to approve the amendment petition.
Mr. Morrow?
Yes, so make sure I understand this clearly. So currently, prior to all of this, MNPS was profiting a net of $500,000 per year for the lease agreement? Like, is that a yearly lease agreement? Is that a one-time?
It's a yearly agreement.
Okay.
So it is a relatively new location for the school.
Right.
They've moved in there either this year or last year. But yes, currently they are receiving $500,000 a year in rent.
So that's a net profit to Metro Schools.
So they're
Revenue.
getting 500 in rent. They're saying that to expand will cost them how much?
$390,000
So that's,
a year.
that's like 110.
110. That was what I was getting to. So now their revenue would, net or gross, whatever, but the net revenue would be 110 instead of 500,000.
Yes. Now, I would say the district, additional argument is that there are already, funds for those 450 students that are already attending that school are going to Nashville Classical. And so this would be an additional 390,000 that would be going to Nashville Classical.
But if Nashville Classical wasn't leasing it, they wouldn't also be receiving that revenue.
That's correct.
Ms. Kim?
Is this working? Oh, so I just to make sure I understand. So what Nashville Classical is proposing is to continue serving their current student population. Current. No
Yes.
new, no expansion to the broader environs of East Nashville. It's just the current student population.
That's correct. So and this is detailed in the executive director's report, but Nashville Classical originally asked for an amendment petition of 572 that would serve their current population plus additional students. Based on conversations with local officials, they amended that down to 527 so that they could continue to serve the current student population through 8th grade.
So the practical implication is that the local school board was proposing that we kick those students out of this school,
Yes.
Or
which
not.
is a reward school.
Or drastically, in order for the school to continue to serve 7th and 8th grade, would have to reduce their kindergarten incoming class to about 30 students to meet the 450.
For a school that is a reward school, outperforming the district and the state, and has 8 applications for each spot.
Yes,
Just wanted to be totally clear.
yes.
But for clarification, it sounds like you said in response to her question that the students would be kicked out of the school. That's not what's going to happen.
Well,
They're
Nashville
asking
Classic,
to increase their enrollment, to amend their number of students and seats. But those that are already enrolled there would not be kicked out. I just want to make sure we're
that's
clear.
correct. So I think what Ms. Kim was saying, and kind of what the steady state is, if the amendment petition was not approved in steady state, the school would have to make one of two choices. One, not continue to grow into 7th and 8th grade, which is what's approved in their charter agreement, and therefore, in essence, say, I'm sorry, we do not have those 7th grade options to those students. Or, in order to serve 7th and 8th grade for its current student population, drastically reduced its incoming kindergarten class so that it is meeting that 450 enrollment capacity.
Understood.
And by drastically reduce, we mean basically do away with kindergarten and first grade in order to make up the difference.
That's correct. They said that it is very likely that because of the preference they give to siblings, that they would not be able to accept any additional kindergartners beyond the siblings that are currently enrolled in the school.
Mr. Cobbins?
Just one real estate point here. I don't think we can account for what Nashville Public Schools is receiving in rent in comparison to what the student enrollment BEP number. I think that's sort of apples and oranges, mainly because we don't know what's in the lease between the two of them. And so what looks like $500 on the surface with other expenses or other costs might be drastically different. So I just caution us to not necessarily consider those sort of apples to apples.
And follow up to that, and that's why I originally started with that line of questions, just I know that the statute's about significant financial hardship, and that was a big conversation yesterday at the hearings. And so if I understand, the charter school committee of the board said there was not going to be a substantial financial loss, therefore recommended that this amendment be approved. but then the board disagreed with that recommendation from their charter school committee.
So the statute around substantial negative fiscal
That's what it
impact is only to a reason for denial in New Start applications. So in this case, the Metro Nashville Board of Education is using fiscal impact as a reason to analyze the best interests of students, the school district, and the community. So the board may take that into consideration as it evaluates this appeal, as it evaluates your standard around best interests, but it also may take into account other factors, including student achievement, demand, et cetera.
Other questions? Yes, Mr. Jensen.
Can you give me an approximation of what the Nashville school annual budget is?
I cannot give that to you right now. I would be more than happy to get that and provide that tomorrow at the board meeting.
And then also, I would like to know if this property were sitting vacant prior to the charter school occupying it.
Was it sitting vacant?
Yes.
Yes, so the history of this school is that Metro Nashville Public Schools was consolidating some schools in the East Nashville area, and so the school that was in this school had moved and consolidated with another school. So was it immediately vacant? I can find that out, but certainly the Metro Nashville Public Schools had moved the traditional middle school out of that because of some consolidation in the area.
You don't need to go to that extent, but my point is this, that from a neighborhood perspective, this is keeping what I would presume is a fairly large property in active state rather than potentially headed toward blight or other problems.
Okay. We will discuss this recommendation again tomorrow at the board meeting prior to voting. So I will give a summary recommendation as well as answering the questions brought up today. Thank you.
Thank you. We will continue with the next agenda item, which is school breakfast in Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good afternoon, board members. I am Lori Paisley with the Department of Education, and as she said, I'm here to talk about school breakfast. As you all may know, it is the most important meal of the day, but we are here today to talk about why school breakfast is important to have at school. So why is it important for our students to have breakfast at school? So you'll learn a little bit about that today, the importance of providing breakfast at school, and also a little bit about our current Tennessee participation. Also, I want to share with you some current Tennessee efforts, as well as introducing you to barriers and some possible alternatives to increasing breakfast participation. So as I said earlier, we know breakfast is important, but why is it important at school? For one, breakfast is important for learning. We know that hunger impairs the ability to learn. We also know that eating breakfast at school improves academic performance and behavior. But breakfast is also important for health. We know that students consume vitamins, fruits, and milk while they eat school meals, and we also know that many students do not get breakfast at home before they attend school, and they do need that nutrition daily. So a little landscape of school breakfast in Tennessee. We know that 65% of students who get a free and reduced price lunch also get school breakfast. So we know that national organizations working on school meals have set a benchmark of 70%. So again, we know that Tennessee is at 65%. So we're very close, but we're not at the benchmark yet. So any school, no matter their size or their eligibility, when they're implementing best practices, can absolutely reach this level of 70%. So here is a little information on how we're doing nationally. As you see on the chart, this is the top 10 states with the ratio free and reduced price school breakfast to lunch participation from the school year 2017 to 2018. So you see there that we are in 7th place. 64.6% rounded up to 65%. So based on our 8 core regions in the state of Tennessee, this is how we are doing. As you see, Northwest and Upper Cumberland are above that benchmark of 70%, but the rest of our regions are very close. We have shared this with all 8 regions, school nutrition directors, coordinated school health coordinators, and superintendents, and they have asked a lot of questions about what Northwest is doing to be able to sit at the top of our 8 regions. So we've been able to share that along with some other best practices that I'm going to share with you today. We applied for No Kid Hungry. It's one of the leading national nonprofit organizations that works in school breakfast. We applied for their School Breakfast Leadership Institute. They started that last year for the first time and selected 5 states. So we applied this past year and were one of 6 states through that competitive proposal process to be selected. And as you see there is our team. You see your very own Amy Owen that's on the team, and we were very happy to have her on the team. I met with Sarah and Amy before we began the application process to make sure that State Board was on board. But No Kid Hungry gives us a criteria, and we must have someone from the Department of Education, State Board of Education, a state principal or superintendent association, and then one of the large urban districts. We selected Brett Foster, the school nutrition director in Knox County Schools. Knox County Schools has the biggest gap of students who eat lunch, also eating breakfast. So we wanted to have her input. Also, we had Ella Watkins, who is from the First Lady staff, and then our No Kid Hungry contractor that we have through a contract with No Kid Hungry. We were able to go and meet with the other states and the No Kid Hungry team to learn more about what we were going to do this year. So had a great team there and wanted you guys to know that we did that. But we also came back with 2 main focus areas. So that was statewide awareness and then awarding mini grants to schools that seek to implement an alternative model. And again, we shared that information with superintendents, coordinated school health, school nutrition, and the Tennessee School Boards Association. So I mentioned earlier that I was going to share some barriers with the traditional breakfast, and that's the traditional breakfast in the cafeteria. We know that many times the stigma that school breakfast is for poor kids causes our students to not go into the cafeteria to eat breakfast. Also, the bus or maybe their carpool doesn't arrive on time for them to go and get that breakfast from the cafeteria. Older students tell us that they're not hungry first thing in the morning, so they don't want to eat when breakfast is provided in the cafeteria before the first bell rings. Also, the cafeteria is not convenient for students. We have heard that if they are dropped off late, whether that be from the bus or their parents' car, at one end of the building and the cafeteria is on the other end of the building, they either don't have time to go and get it or they don't want to take time to go ahead and get it, which leads me to the last bullet. Socializing is many times much more fun than eating alone first thing in the morning in the cafeteria. And so how do we increase breakfast participation? How do we get students to eat breakfast more if they don't want to go to the cafeteria or are not able? That's where we get into breakfast after the bell models. And those models are breakfast in the classroom. That's where breakfast is served and consumed in the classroom. Grab and go, which is meals served in a convenient, easy to access location before and after the bell. And then second chance breakfast, which is meals that are served anytime after first period. So these are some stories of schools in Tennessee that are doing a great job. There you see breakfast in the classroom in action, and that is Millington Municipal Schools in West Tennessee. You see the picture on the left where they have the coolers. That is E.A. Harold School, and there they take breakfast to every classroom using those cooler bags that you see there. And at this school at EA Herald, at 1 year alone, they increased breakfast from 76% to 88% of the overall student population eating breakfast every morning. So they're able to do that through that cooler system that they've developed, and you see the students there eating in the classroom. Another example is Grab and Go. This is Tullahoma City Schools. They took a regular cart and put all of their breakfast options out for students to choose and take. And they also have carts located all over the school. And then this blue kiosk that you see there was purchased with the funding that they received from the mini grant that they were awarded. And then again, this is Unicoi County Schools, and you can see there that is another one of those carts that they place throughout the school. Those are high school students that I mentioned don't really want to eat first thing in the morning. Cafeteria may not be convenient, but when they go to the school and have the cart there under every turn, you see them even having it under the stairs. No matter where they go, they can do a quick second chance breakfast. And Unicoi County Schools has this second chance breakfast with the kiosk under the stairs, outside the library, in the commons area, in the CTE building. And breakfast is served in the morning before school and again after second period. This is Unicoi County High School's principal, Dr. Chris Bogart, and he and Maggie Fair, the school nutrition director, were our East Tennessee breakfast champion. And so we got a quote from Dr. Bogart just to give the principal's perspective about what they do there in Unicoi County. And he said that Second Chance Breakfast Program has made as much positive difference in their school as anything they have done. The program improved test scores, created a more positive environment, as well as giving students something to look forward to every day at school. It's such a part of their culture that he can't imagine their school not having it. And when we went there to visit with them and give them their award, we were able to have a roundtable with students. And we also met with some of the cafeteria staff. And one of the cafeteria staff told us, and the principal told us, that there was a student that was having some attendance issues before they started doing this second chance breakfast. And he continued to come to the same kiosk, the same cafeteria staff member every day, and they built a relationship. He graduated from high school, but later saw her out in the community and told her she was the reason why he feels like he graduated from high school. So many times having these alternative breakfast options also gives the students a chance to engage with the school's cafeteria staff. And so I want to thank you for listening, but I also want to recognize we have the State Nutrition Director, Sandy Dawes, in the audience. If you guys want any information about the school breakfast program, I have her email address there, but at this time I'll welcome any questions.
So for clarification, when did this begin? Because I know you were awarded this grant, and then you issued many grant opportunities out to the districts. So when did it begin, and how many schools actually were awarded those grants?
We began the School Breakfast Leadership Institute year back in June. That's when the team traveled to the actual institute to start working with No Kid Hungry. And we did the first round of grants in the fall, and that was approximately $330,000. And then we did the second round this second semester, so they're currently drawing down those funds, which took the remainder of the $500,000 we had for mini grants.
So in terms of the future of doing this across the state, where there may be a challenge in getting those numbers up that you talked about earlier in the presentation, would there be another opportunity? Do you plan to apply for another grant? Or do you have a sense that the schools would be able to implement something like this on their own without additional dollars?
They get federal reimbursements for the breakfast served, so they are able to do that. I feel that the grants just gave them a little extra funding to do something like that blue kiosk that you saw in Tullahoma City. But one thing that it's done is it's helped to increase participation, which is increased revenue, and that allows them to do more things. Really, many times it's the breakfast they prepare in the cafeteria, but they just take it on a cart. So sometimes it's just the cart, but they also have that point of sale that they need to do to count the meals. So the grants have been able to help with those areas to help them be able to do it outside of the cafeteria.
Well, I appreciate you coming and making the presentation, but in terms of best practice and sharing this across the state, are you all doing that? Do you know if the school districts themselves that have participated in the mini grants are able to do that themselves?
Yes, we started sharing the best practices even before the mini grants were awarded, and we've been able to continue to share those best practices. I mentioned some of the places we've done that, sharing with superintendents. They go back, they look at their individual schools and see who's doing the best job and maybe connect those schools within the district to each other. But we've done that at many conferences, meetings, when we've been able to share what success stories and best practices like the one I shared today are doing.
This is great work, and I appreciate this presentation. I know there's some other, do you have a comment? Sure. Thank you, Ms. Owen.
Lori, I was just going to say it was such a pleasure to be on that team in June, and I'm really grateful we got to show the board breakfast after the bell in action this morning at Wright Middle School, where they use red padded bags for hot food, blue for cold food, and students were able to access extra snacks from any leftovers throughout the day. One thing they pointed out at Wright Middle School was that this was not a one-and-done process. When they first started breakfast in the classroom, they had teachers noticing, mess, worries about insects or spills or that sort of thing. So it really did take a coordinated effort. Can you speak to it all, how you've seen this approach evolve over the state?
Yeah, I think Amy mentioned something that I didn't mention about the barriers is the mess. So many times you just need to find a teacher who's willing to just try it and forget about the mess. And you can do that as simple as getting one teacher in one school to try it out. And as Amy touched on, you'll find that students are more attentive. There's not that much of a mess. Really cleaning up your mess is a life skill. And so that's a good thing to do with your students in the classroom. But they sometimes need to find ways to do it where you might have apple slices prepackaged, and all you have to do is put that package in the trash can. So we've been able to just really see so many best practices. One I didn't have it in this presentation was Knox County Schools, which I told you has the biggest challenge with improving. But we found a school that was a Title I school, and we visited it. And actually, the principal, I had gone in to greet him. He talked with me for a few minutes, but told me, I've got to go serve breakfast. And I followed him into the cafeteria. And as Amy said, there's a hot and there's a cold line. The principal was able to greet the students as they picked up their breakfast. The cafeteria manager was able to do that in the other line. And I followed them into their classroom and watched them eat their breakfast. They got to pick hot or cold. And the teacher took attendance, maybe got them busy. They had morning announcements. The students were able to watch that. So we see different varying reasons why they don't want to try it, but being able to share the best practices and the success stories within the district but across the state have really inspired people to do a little bit more.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. Epe, did you have something?
I was just going to say, again, from Wright School, they went through the process about 3 or 4 times before they found and messing and how they can throw the trash away. So I encourage the nutrition get together and continue to show those best practices, because that's what got their participation up.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great work. Yes, Mr.
Comment or
Jensen.
question. You had in your previous slide the word stigma, and we heard the same thing this morning. I'd appreciate knowing how that works so that the kids who are economically disadvantaged are at the same time having breakfast with the rest of their peers in school, or is it just for them? Or I'd like to understand that better.
Well, the schools that are CEP with the community eligibility provision, all students eat free. And so that takes away a lot of the stigma, because if you're going into the cafeteria to eat breakfast, a lot of kids think, oh, you're on free and reduced meals. That's why you're going there. So when anyone can eat free, and maybe they hear about something great that's being served in the cafeteria, all students want to go to have that meal. But when you have it, as I've shown in the presentation, where it's an alternative model, like you saw those students just walking by the kiosk to get that, then it's just anybody that's hungry, doesn't matter if you pay for it or not, you just go and get that breakfast. So really putting it in a different place, in a different way. I know there was one cafeteria manager that was trying to get the 8th grade students to participate more, and they weren't coming through the line, but even within the cafeteria, she put a kiosk in the back corner where the 8th grade cool kids were sitting, and then all of a sudden they started buying the food right there at the kiosk. And there was another school nutrition director in West Tennessee that was trying to get high school breakfast participation up, and she tried everything, but then she thought, I'm going to go where they are. They're out in the parking lot, either driving, rode with a friend, got dropped off, and is sitting in the car. She took a cart out to the high school parking lot, and her breakfast participation went up. So there's things like that that you can do to get participation up, but it also takes away that stigma because everyone is participating and purchasing a breakfast, so no one knows if you are free and reduced or not.
Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great work.
Thanks.
We are going to pause for a 10-minute break, and we will return here at 3:27 promptly. Thank you. The board members could return to their seats. That's good. It is now 3:27 PM and we are reconvening. We're now back in session. I feel like I'm at the legislature.
All right.
Please be seated. Thank you all so much. Next up, we have Commissioner Schwinn, who's going to give us an update on the strategic plan, details from the Tennessee Department of Education. Are you ready, Commissioner? And thank you so much for being with us.
Okay, so with the department and, oh, great, hello. So we had the Tennessee Best for All strategic plan. This is the state strategic plan for education as rolled out by the governor at the State of the State, and we're very excited about some of the things that he talked about. To start off with, we want to talk about how the priorities were formed. I'm going to go through the next couple of slides relatively quickly because I know we talked about it briefly in November before I had to book it to West Tennessee to welcome our new baby boy. So that was fun. So that was the personal. So thank you for being so gracious about that. With the forming of the priorities, we had a number of different ways in which we solicited feedback. The first was to listen. Typically, when you have state strategic plans, the first thing that you do is you look at data, you then use that data, the department creates a plan and then gets feedback. What we decided to do this time was to actually solicit the feedback in advance, use those initial comments in conjunction with some of the data trends that we were seeing, put out a plan, and then put out multiple rounds. We ended up with over 500 classroom visits, over 35,000 comments, and then over 150 meetings. And in that process, what we found is a pretty clear theme, and that was across the board that the most important thing was teachers and students. Every comment, every conversation, and I think every piece of feedback eventually came back to the child in the classroom and the teacher who is responsible for that child and that child's education. And so certainly that's how we reflected what we thought was going to be most important to reflect in the plan. The other thing that we heard from our districts and very clearly from our superintendents, and I think something that resonated, was just what is the purpose of public education? I think we had traditionally had 4 goals, and that had to do with graduation rates, ACT, third grade proficiency, and what we wanted to be able to communicate was a common vision or metric that encompassed what we were trying to achieve. And we are not trying to achieve a series of smaller input metrics along the way. That tells us how well we are doing. It is not actually a long-term goal. A child's ACT score is not going to be the thing that determines whether or not he or she is successful. What we do want to look at is what we think the purpose of public education is, and that's putting our students on a path to success, helping them to achieve whatever it is they want to do and achieve the goals they've set for themselves. So as a department, instead of looking at the input metrics along the way, we want to be able to see whether or not our children were successful after they leave us, when we aren't able to wag our fingers at them when they don't do their homework or give them extra credit or make sure they're in class. Are they able to be successful? And so one of the things we're looking at, and our primary goal is to look at what happens to our students 2 years after they graduate, whether they have persistence in higher ed, a TCAT certificate or similar, military enlistment, or a good paying job. That also brought us to 3 primary priority areas. The first is academics, the second is whole child, and the third is educators. Essentially, from a coherence and theory of action perspective, we believe that if a child is in a classroom and they have high quality materials, an educator and a principal who are exceptional and supports to ensure that they are able to access those materials, that they will be successful. So in priority 1, we have academics, which is ensuring that every single child has a high quality education no matter where they live. Number 2 is whole child, which looks at the academic and non-academic needs of all of our students. And then number 3 is educators, and that is kind of our big moonshot to say, we want Tennessee to be the #1 place in the country to teach, that there's no better place to become and remain an educator. People move here as a result because this is the best place in the country to be a teacher. The other thing that we wanted to note about this plan is that typically what you see is a series of initiatives and a lot of kind of one-offs that are kind of put together as a plan. We didn't think that that was effective, nor did we think that was the appropriate role of the state. We felt like it was incredibly important to have a coherent plan that built on and supported what is already happening in districts and not to put something extra or additional on the 147 LEAs that we have across the state. We wanted to make sure that it was aligned with the work they were already doing and to support doing that work as well as possible. And so the comprehensive nature of the plan is to create a coherent approach from top to bottom and across vertical and horizontal articulation with the work that is already happening in our public schools. So start, and there are a number of these. So again, I'm going to go fast, and then we'll go to the budget after each priority area. First is early literacy supports. The governor rolled out a pretty ambitious budget request for this that was aligned to the literacy bill that was filed during the State of the State. The early literacy supports at $37.5 million one time, $11.25 million recurring, and that includes a number of things. First and foremost, it includes ensuring that every single child K through 2 has high quality instructional materials, both for foundational reading as well as for the content standards. Second is it includes 2 weeks of professional development for every teacher K through 2 in the state, as well as anyone else who instructs in literacy. And that can include paras, it can include principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches. It also has additional supports for implementation. What we heard is that when there's a lot of money and we purchase a lot of things, it doesn't necessarily mean that staff have a good idea of how to implement that, and people need coaching and support. And so it does provide for pretty significant ongoing implementation coaching for our public schools over the course of a 4-year period that has gradual release and then restarts again. And then the last thing is it includes family resource guides and family reading guides so that parents are able to do that work with their children at home, as well as having a common and shared common diagnostic across the state. Our districts are currently spending quite a bit of money on those shared diagnostics in K through 2. Having a common one with reportable data allows us to benchmark how our students are doing along the way and not wait until 3rd grade to get that level of information. Number 2 is high quality materials. So as you all know, from the November meeting, we have a new ELA, state adoption list that is now based on quality and not just compliance. As a result, and knowing that ELA is the most expensive adoption of any of the content areas because the number of materials that have to go along with it, the governor is proposing a $20 million investment to support the purchase of high quality materials. What that $20 million would include is $10 million for the actual purchase of materials, which is approximately 40 to 50% of the total cost per student, and then another $10 million that would, again, support implementation. We know that with ELA changes and the pedagogical strategies that are required to shift from some of the materials that some of our teachers are using to what is required in high quality materials, it's not as easy as just using a new textbook. You actually need quite a bit of implementation support to be able to change your instructional practices within the classroom. Next is innovative assessments. What we also heard, and we've heard this nationally, but certainly in Tennessee, and that's the idea that the tests that we have, our summative test TCAP, and the materials that are used in the classroom are not aligned. So if you think about a teacher who says, I have these high quality materials, but at the end of the year, I'm actually assessed and evaluated on this test, and they don't match. What we have heard and what we have seen is that people defer to how they're evaluated. So even if you have these great materials, if you know that you're being evaluated on this test, we see things like test prep, we see things like drill and kill, and that's not what we want. So for innovative assessments, also because as a state we own our items, most states lease items, which means you get to use them for the test and then you have to give them back and you pay for them every year. We actually build our own, have our teachers review them and put those on the tests. That means that we can provide for free interim assessments to every single content area that is tested. It also means that we can build out formative assessments or smaller pilot assessments that match the instructional materials on the adopted list. So if you have a set of instructional materials, we can use TCAP questions to create those unit tests so that the teacher can see, here's what I taught, and here are questions that I would likely see on that end of the year test that match that scope and sequence. The interim assessments will roll out this year. We are ahead of schedule on that. Formative assessments, we are working and have been working with one specific group, and we expect that 2 out of the 3 most commonly used instructional materials in the state that it looks like will be adopted, we'll be able to start rolling out those formative assessments next year as well. So we are ahead of schedule there. And then third is we are also ahead of schedule on building out a data analytics platform that will be freely available to all schools. And that essentially this year what you will see is that parents will have access to their students' data report for the first time online. They will not be reliant on having the PDF paper sent to them. And then in future years, right now, we know for sure by spring of 2022, we expect a number of tests by spring 2021. All parents and teachers will have access to the full test, including the questions, what their students answered, why it was right or wrong, and a link to resources to support that child's development. Last is career exploration. What we heard from students across the state was that going into high school, once they were in their freshman, sophomore year, they didn't necessarily find themselves on a pathway that they liked. And so by having more career exploration in pre-K through 8, it helps students identify both what they like and what they're good at so they can make more informed decisions and choices about the pathway that they choose in high school, so they are leading towards credits that will ultimately help them after they graduate. There's a number of pilots that we've been putting forth as a department and as a state, and the governor has used science as one of the ways that he wants to expand that, and that is a free platform for districts, and we're piloting what the most effective use of that will be. And then this is in very small font on this, but this is just an overview of what that budget looks like. Again, for literacy materials, it's $37.5 million one-time, $11.25 million recurring for the literacy implementation. And again, that's the science of reading. We also have high-quality instructional materials. That's the $10 million to help purchase materials, $10 million for implementation. I do want to say we have a number of districts who are early adopters. They would not be penalized for being early adopters. They would essentially get the same per student funding. It would just be used to advance their programs even further and to also be dissemination sites and demonstration sites so that teachers are able to see what it looks like to implement the materials in the classroom. I just want to make a note of that. We want to make sure that we're honoring and certainly elevating the work that is already occurring. For assessment, it's $2.7 million. The $0.7 million is for some additional staff to be able to build out the formative and interim assessments. The $2 million allows us to continue that work for every set of instructional materials, as I said. Finally, we have youth science, which is just a little over $500,000 to expand that pilot across the state. And then we have innovative high school models, and that's $10 million. And we'll talk a little bit about that with the Charter School Facility Fund, but it's intended to allow for our rural districts to have comprehensive high schools, especially when we look at the inequity of many of our rural high schools who are too small to offer a set and suite of advanced courses because they have graduating classes of 200 or 300 students. So those students don't get to have AP Chemistry and AP Bio and AP English Literature and AP English language. We want to make sure that they still have those same opportunities, and so we think by having a more innovative approach, whether that's online, whether that is having a consortia high school that multiple counties share, et cetera, we want to be a little bit more innovative, and facilities are one of the great barriers to that. Whole child. So for whole child supports, and I think you have all either read or heard me railing on this, and I feel pretty strongly. I think many of you probably heard this from our superintendents. This is the number one piece of feedback and thing that we heard from our teachers, our principals, and our superintendents over the last year, and that was across every part of the state, every demographic, and every grade level. Our whole child supports is intended to ensure that we are creating a context and an ecosystem that supports the whole child. This is another way of saying this is it's expanded coordinated school health. We've done an excellent job in the state with coordinated school health. The department nationally, if you think about the National Department of Education and the CDC, have transferred that language to be whole child, and that's because of this pretty dramatic focus on mental health and the needs of students in this area. The governor announced his intention of a $250 million, so $250 million investment in a K-12 mental health trust fund. The idea of that would be that over the next year, the department in conjunction with other agencies like mental health and substance abuse, would do a needs assessment for every district in the state. What we don't want to do is have a blanket general approach where every district essentially gets the same thing. We know that many of our districts have different needs. Metro Nashville does not have the same needs as Clay County, and to treat them the same or assume that those needs are the same is missing a little bit of the point. And so we want to do a needs assessment and say, if this is the bar of where we think every school and every student in terms of the access to resources they should have, here's where the district is. We can make much more informed and objective decisions about what resources we put into schools and how we think about funding requests in the future. So that would be that trust fund that would continue to gain interest as we do the needs assessment and then make decisions in conjunction with partners in the community around where those resources will best fit. I wanted to be able to take a little bit of a time to just talk a little bit about where we are with youth mental health in Tennessee. The dark blue means that it is the lowest rated of states in the country. So Tennessee is in the bottom 10 when we look at overall support for children with major depressive episodes. That nationally has increased from 8.66% to just over 13% over the 5 years between 2012 and 2017. If you look at Tennessee statistics and you look at things like major depressive episodes, ability to get any kind of support either in real time or within 48 hours, suicide rates, bullying rates, children who bring weapons to school, children who require any kind of mental health supports, we are typically in the bottom 10 or bottom 15 in the country and have remained so. And so we did have some positive growth over the last year. We were 49th in the country. We have now moved to between 40th and 45th, but it is still an area where we have heard tremendous need from our districts. We are not doing this alone. One of the things that we think is a real opportunity and something that I've been particularly pleased about is how closely the commissioners across each agency are working together to ensure that we've identified what the resources are that are currently available before we start asking for more. So we think that there's a lot more cohesion that can happen across the system and across state government. These are just a few of those that we've worked in pretty close contact with over the last 6 months. In particular, I'd like to call out TennCare and mental health and substance abuse. We meet regularly to determine what services they can offer and how we can have more advantageous billing, especially so that more students can get access to the care that they need. Second, in whole child, this is going to be a little bit of a theme, but it's kind of what is the role of the state and how can we support more efficient programs that we can do at a state level so we don't require districts to purchase everything at a local level and be able to use those resources elsewhere. Citizenship and civics education is one area the governor is proposing a $1 million one-time investment, $200,000 recurring investment. This is to meet a lot of the requirements that are already in our state standards. So things like financial literacy, civics, citizenship education, and some personal development work. By having something that is Tennessee specific, because many of our districts are spending, again, $5 to $12 per student on each of these individually, we can develop something that is a cohesive K through 12 or pre-K through 12 set of instructional materials. It would cover all of the graduation requirements. It would be Tennessee specific with local care, personalization available. It would include instructional materials, videos, and kind of all the razzle-dazzle that we've come to expect from our instructional materials. But it also ensures that our districts, again, can use those saved dollars and push those back into the classroom for things like personnel, salaries, additional professional development and support. So the idea is to build this out. We're doing a needs assessment again over the next 6 months. The department will be in each of the 8 core regions, meeting with every district as well as their staff, figuring out what the needs are, and then going into building out the materials over the next year. And then last is exceptionalities. One of the things that we think is incredibly important is to have a very clear and direct conversation about our students and all the students we serve. Most specifically, just over 97%, almost 98% of our teachers have at least one child with a disability in their classroom. We want to make sure that our teachers are receiving the supports that they need and schools are receiving the supports they need to serve all of our students. We have a growing number of students with disabilities in the state. We have a growing number of children who speak a language other than English, and we certainly have a number of students who are gifted or highly mobile. We have IDEA dollars at the federal level that are in reserve. We would like to use those funds to create resource hubs across the state. so that if I am a district and I need immediate technical assistance, I have someone I can call. If I am a district and I have a student move into my district, let's say I'm a very, very small rural district, and they have a set of disabilities that I do not have the capacity to address. And we've heard this over and over, where the special education director is also the financial lead, who is also the bus driver, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They may not be set up to serve that child's need or that family's need, but they do have a legal requirement and a moral obligation to do so. And right now, that's a really hard point because we don't have enough special education teachers in the state, nor are our districts resourced to do so. So by having these resource hubs, I can get immediate support, I can get strategic planning support, I can get short-term, no more than 6 months, actual resources to serve those students, and I'm able to get professional development for free at my school site. These would be hubs that are focused on our highest need areas. Right now, those have been identified as child find, for which Tennessee continues to show improvement and need to have improvement. Behavioral and mental health, emotional disturbance is one of the categories there. We've seen a lot of need there, as well as more broad areas related to family and community engagement. The next thing under here is having an online tool. If you've been on a website, understood.org, that is a good example of the type of resource we'd like to build out. Many of our families have indicated that navigating the system related to special education is incredibly difficult. What we did as a department, many of us did empathy interviews and empathy experiences, which said if I were a parent and I had a child who exhibited these characteristics, or I had a concern about my child, would I be able to navigate the system in a way that would get my child supports? The majority of people who do that exercise said it was too hard and then said, well, I would just find someone who could help me do that. Isn't that a luxury to just say, I'll just go hire or find someone who can help me navigate the system? Most of our parents don't have that agency or that capital to do so. We need to make it easier for families to navigate what can be a very, very complex system. And we need to ensure that our teachers have the professional development and resources to serve all of their students. And we know right now, many of them do not. And then last but not least, we want to make sure that we just have stronger regional engagement and opportunities so that more stakeholders feel engaged in this work. It is very, very challenging work, and we know, again, for many of our small and rural communities who are getting 1, 2, 3, 10 students who speak a language other than English, for example, they don't have either enough population to staff an entire person or the resources to support those students. And so we want to make sure that we're understanding what the different landscapes look like across the state, providing resources to address that, and ensuring that every parent feels engaged and has an opportunity to engage in their child's education. This is some of the funding. So again, for mental health, the governor's proposing a $250 million endowment. He's also proposing the $1 million one-time $200,000 recurring for the citizenship and civics education work. And then we have IDEA funding to support the online tool and resource hubs for our districts. And then last, in terms of these 3 strategic priorities, the first is grow your own. I want to be able to just kind of explain how we thought about this, and that's trying to take from head to tail what it would look like in terms of having a teacher and his or her experience. And that goes from the moment in which someone thinks that they might want to be a teacher to the moment in which someone stops being a teacher. So for Grow Your Own, we're trying to address getting people into the field first and foremost. And so the governor announced our intention to begin an advanced placement seminar in teaching and education class. It would be the first statewide class of its kind. We would develop that with our exceptional teachers across the state, but it would be to send a signal that AP is not just for science because you want to be a doctor, or government because you want to be an attorney. AP for teaching and education through the AP seminar class is to send the signal that you too should become a teacher. It's the greatest profession ever. So we want to start to just have that signaling earlier, especially because what we're seeing is that we had a large percentage of freshmen in college who were open to the field of teaching. That number has dropped significantly over the last 6 years. And so we now know we have to push a little bit more into high school and bring that profession open to more of our high school students. Second, we have innovative residencies for future teachers and the teacher fellowship opportunities. This is the governor announced the governor's fellowship. and that is 1,000 teachers who, in conjunction with Tennessee Promise, would be able to go to college for free and receive some specialized programming related to leadership development, and then certainly getting more on-the-ground experience with students before the end of their college experience. But again, to remove the barrier of the cost of college for many of our students, we want to ensure that we have more people pushing into education, remove the barriers that exist for many of our students across the state to going into education. This would allow 1,000 teachers to graduate for free without college debt and go into the field of teaching, committing to teaching in Tennessee for 5 years. We would like for the majority of those to be in hard to staff and hard to fill placements. And then third is Grow Your Own. We've announced a number of those facilitated relationships across the state. They look very different. They are intended to meet the unique needs of schools. I'm going to just talk about a couple of them. I think many of us have heard of the first one that we approved, and that was between Austin Peay and Clarksville Montgomery. In short, we have 50 students in Clarksville Montgomery who will graduate, attend Austin Peay. They will go to school for free for 3 years. After 3 years, they will earn their BA. The entire time they've been in earning their BA, they will be studying under a master or mentor teacher. They will be paid as a para. They will get years in the pension system and health care. They will also graduate dual certified in either math or science and special education. So if you think about your first day of teaching and what many of our teachers experience, this is significantly better in terms of what students are going to get from a first-year teacher. It is intended to put our future teachers in front of students as much as possible before they are responsible for their own classroom. We also believe that is the most effective if you are studying under one of our strongest teachers in the state. We have another district who is an ed prep program, so an LEA as EPP, and that allows, again, for our local education agencies to be able to take ownership over their local students and be able to support teachers in the local communities. We also we will be announcing a very exciting program in 2 weeks, so stay tuned. We will send you some information right before that, but we're very excited about that. We have commitments, like I said, from Austin Peay. We also have commitments from Lipscomb and a number of other universities. We have had 2 summits around Grow Your Own, and we've had over half of our districts express interest in creating those programs. The last one, and this is just to give you a sense of, I think, the range of experiences that our teachers can have, is that we do have our Tennessee School for the Blind. One of the things we're doing is a Grow Your Own program because it is very, very difficult, not just to find special education teachers, but certainly to find special education teachers to serve our blind, deaf students. And so we will have a Grow Your Own program through our Tennessee School for the Blind that will, again, allow for existing educators to get an additional certification specific for special education and serving students who are blind through a program with that school. So again, we can be very innovative and interesting in how we're thinking about that, but we really think that this is an opportunity to take existing teachers or potential new teachers and bring them into hard-to-staff fields like science, math, and special education. For Ed Prep and Leader Prep innovation, there were a number of things that were discussed. What the 2 budget items I'd like to talk about here is the governor announced Ed Prep and Leader Prep innovation funds of $3 million one time. That would be $2 million for Ed Prep, $1 million for Leader Prep, and that would be for competitive grants for our educator prep providers to begin to restructure their programs to be more aligned with contemporary needs of our teachers. So things like the science of reading, behavioral supports for students, effective discipline practices, thinking about data and assessment. Leader Prep in the same way, we want to make sure that our principals have structures around what are effective practices in coaching so that teachers aren't getting great instruction and then going into their classrooms and having principals who haven't had that same level of coherence in their programs. The majority of our principals do not have experience managing adults. They go straight from the classroom into being a principal. Kids are easier, and it's hard to learn that for the first time, your first year as a principal. So we want to make sure that we are building out leaders who are exceptional, and we also know that we have pretty high turnover in our leader space, which I'll talk about in the next slide. The last thing I want to talk about is the Tennessee Teacher and Leader Institute. The governor announced $20 million one time, $5 million recurring, and that is to build a state-of-the-art, best-in-the-country educator preparation program right here in Tennessee. Many of us use the phrase, building the plane while you're flying it, and we know that's not actually a real thing. You can't build a plane while you are flying it. And so we want to be able to provide the $3 million to make our existing programs as strong as possible and give them the opportunity to continue to strengthen. But we also know that if we want to build a better plane, if we want to see what is possible in ed prep, we actually have to start from white space. And so we think there are things that we would like to see. Things like research which says that you don't know who's going to be a good teacher until they're in front of children. That makes sense when you actually think about it, but we're trying to find ways to say, well, if you get this test score or that test score, that will mean you're a great teacher. Many of us know brilliant folks, and as soon as they get in front of children, you think maybe not education, maybe not for you. And there's lots of other people. I think of my cousin Maddie, who kind of got by in high school, wonderful, wonderful guy, but not necessarily as focused on his academics, got to college, got serious, and is an incredible history teacher. We want to make sure that we get people who are exceptional in their content areas and are also really good with children. We have our kids for the majority of their waking hours for 13 years. We need to make sure that we have the right adults in front of them every day. So building out a really strong ed prep program that gets future teachers in front of kids as early as possible, gets them dual certified in their content area and special education. Again, given that 98% of them will have a child with a disability in their classrooms, and ensuring that we are building ed prep for the children that we have and the system that we have now and not the system that we had 30 or 40 years ago. So in terms of the last, which is school leader supports, and we look at school leaders not just as principals or APs, but also as teachers. We believe teachers are leaders, and so we want to start and think about that. In terms of just principals and APs, we have a couple of different programs. The first is the Aspiring Assistant Principal Network. What that does is every single district gets at least one spot, and that is for someone in a school building who spends at least 1 hour in an assistant principal-like set of responsibilities. That could be a teacher who maybe it's a 6-period day. One of those periods, they are operating as an assistant principal in an elementary school. That might be someone who is the backup principal when the principal's out of the building. It's very flexible, but it does allow for those teachers to be able to get an administrative credential and their master's degree for free. And so that is starting. Every single district gets at least one spot. Many of our districts will get multiple spots. Districts are also able to purchase additional seats at a reduced cost, essentially somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000. And then again, that gets them a master's degree and a credential at low or no cost. Part of this is also the Rural Principal Network. We're in our second cohort of that. We've been incredibly excited with that partnership, Tassel Academies, and then the Principal Supervisor Network. We know that principals also have coaches and need support, and we haven't actually expanded again into that vertical articulation. So how do we ensure that our principals who are coaching our teachers are getting the support that they need in terms of doing their jobs? And then additionally to this, we have our teacher endorsements. We want to be able to ensure that when we ask teachers for feedback, it's not a check the box exercise. We are actually asking for meaningful feedback, and we can't do that if we don't provide additional supports and opportunities for teachers to grow within their craft without saying to make more money or progress in your career, you have to leave the classroom. We don't think that's the right message. We want our exceptional teachers to stay with children where they have the biggest impact. So we want to build out a series of endorsement pathways for everything from science of reading, assessment, accountability, high quality materials, and mentorship. That will allow our teachers to get additional stipend work. It also means that when we bring together statewide teacher cohorts for assessment, we have a group of teachers who have expertise in that area and are able to go further and faster, especially as we're thinking about some of the things we want to build out. That is very small, and my eyes are not that good, so I'm going to try to do it from memory. Apologies if it is not exactly right, or I could use the one behind me. That's probably better. We have $150,000 recurring for AP Seminar. What that does is it gives us the ability to get through every single high school in the state within the first 4 years, would have at least one teacher who has been certified by the College Board to teach AP Seminar for teaching and education. That also creates a cohort of teachers across the state who would be able to give us a lot of advice and consultation and advisory group. We have the 8.5 million recurring for the Governor's Fellows. Grow Your Own, it's 5 million one time, and again, those would be competitive grants. Grow Your Own doesn't actually require that much funding, depending on how you structure it at the district level. The funding really is about the facilitation to create the program itself. But having a unit, a person who can facilitate those programs, who can work with the universities. So these would be competitive grants to get them off the ground. But using class size waivers and things, districts have been able to support this independently. Like I said, 3 million, 2 million for EPP, 1 million for LPP innovation, the 20 million one-time, 5 million recurring for the Tennessee Teacher and Leader Institute. The school leader networks that you saw on the previous slide in combination would be $3 million recurring. And again, that's everything from the Rural Principal Network, Aspiring AP, and Principal Supports. And then we have the teacher articulated pathways. The $1 million one-time allows us to build out those certification or endorsement programs. The $200,000 recurring is to run the pilots, and those are for stipends for teachers to participate. Assessment, so this is looking at our foundations. I ran through very quickly because I know this board usually has a lot of questions. But I also wanted to talk about the foundational elements of education in Tennessee, and the first is assessment. We were very excited. We've had 2 strong testing windows after I know several years of challenges. We expect to have another strong window this year. We are ahead or on time with 100% of our milestones with our new vendor. I get a biweekly report, both verbally and in writing, and we are very pleased with how it's going. We've also required significantly more district engagement from our current vendor, so they've been traveling around the state making sure they are doing a needs assessment for our districts. We also negotiated the assessment contract as a state for the first time, so we moved from spending something above $11 per test booklet to now less than $3, which is what the industry standard is. It saved us over $15 million over the course of the contract, is just one example. We also got a lot more out of it, things like process improvements, better portal windows and technology, et cetera. And we also think that as we return to online assessment and have that conversation, we will be able to, in very short order, have full-length practice exams ready for next year, as well as a suite of assessment questions. So we will have an item bank that teachers will be able to use. Right now, fun fact, most of our teachers have to print out PDFs and then cut them and then put them on the copy machine and then print them. So we would like that not to happen. So yes, yes, experience that. So now, new and improved, you'll be able to create tests electronically. And also we would like to get to the point where they can be administered electronically, and we're using our current student information system. So the ones the districts select, this will be compatible with that. So the data transfer is seamless. We have accountability next. So accountability A through F grading scales will come out this August for the first time. In late February, early March, we will be putting together communications packages and templates for districts. We know and we have seen as we've studied A through F rollout in other states that the most challenging component is how do you communicate that to your families, to your teachers, especially when you're putting a grade on a school. You want to make sure people understand what that means. Probably not surprising, this is most stressful for realtors as they're selling homes in the spring and the summer. And so we want to make sure that we give community members accurate information so they know where the grades are coming from. So we're looking at a communications package that we can give out as a template to our districts as they're presenting to their boards and their communities. And then after that is school turnaround. We are in the process of thinking about what a streamlined and easy to understand transparent school turnaround framework can look like. First and foremost, we have focus schools, ATSI and TSI schools. This year we ran our data accurately and that was exciting. And so we got the right labels with the right funding mechanisms for our focus schools, our TSI and ATSI schools in summer of 2019. We also want to have a more streamlined and clearly understood version of school turnaround. So we have that broken out into 3 tiers. There's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 1 is still priority schools. We have 90 priority schools in the state. That's the bottom 5%. We have 4 people at the department who oversee priority schools. It is one of the lowest ratios in terms of staffing in the country for turnaround work. So for tier 1, those are those schools that are in the bottom 5%, but those are schools that have not seen the same level of consistent and persistent low performance. So it's essentially towards the top of that bottom 5%. And those are schools that we identify that may need some structural supports to change how they think about funding, but not necessarily the massive investments to completely rethink their entire school. Tier 2, we consider turnaround. So we're getting past improvement and moving to turnaround. That turnaround space is a much more significant investment, anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000. And that would be for very clear requirements, things like using high quality instructional materials, operating with the science of reading, first dibs on highly qualified educators. Many of our turnaround schools or current priority schools have the highest vacancy levels in the state. Many of those schools are not staffed. We have a couple of examples where, for example, a child does not have a math teacher and hasn't had a math teacher for multiple years in a row. We also see that many of our districts who receive those funding are not able to use the funding, and so we have risk of lapse. We want to make sure that if we get priority dollars, and we get about $20 million a year from the federal government, we think there's a lot of space to use that. The only other example I would give is in districts, we have a lot of certified personnel, and so we believe that there isn't necessarily a reason to have teacher vacancies. It's about using staff you have, but every single child deserves to have a highly qualified teacher in front of them every day. Right now, we have 13,000 students in the state of Tennessee who do not have a certified teacher in front of them. If we want to talk about improving in our NAEP rankings, if we want to talk about improving proficiency, the first step is ensuring a certified teacher is in every classroom every day for every child. We will also be doing for Tier 3 the ASD. There's been a lot of talk about that, and we will be excited to have conversations over time. The governor announced in his proposed budget $25 million recurring. Again, that's because there was a commitment from the state to be able to provide supports for the ASD. We want to ensure that we meet that commitment. We also know that $20 million over 90 schools doesn't actually add up to that much to provide the supports that we need for the bottom 5%. And when we talk about bottom 5%, we're oftentimes talking about schools who are less than 10% proficient. And again, schools with very high teacher turnover rates and very, very high vacancy rates. Just another stat, we also are looking at the highest turnover rate for our principals and APs. As a state, we have approximately 18 to 22% turnover every 2 years. That means a fifth of our principals are turning over every 2 years. When you think about leadership instability, you think about learned apathy in the teaching profession, that's having a new boss every 2 years. That's very, very difficult in our ASD and turnaround schools. Those schools tend to be at more risk for higher turnover. So then broadly as a theory of action, again, we want to build on the foundations of what's made Tennessee so strong over the last 10 years and shown so much growth, and that is an assessment accountability, high standards evaluation, and then school improvement. But we also know to build on that, what that does is it essentially raises the bar. And what we've seen and what we're calling Reform 1.0 across the country, and I think there have been a lot of op-eds by former state chiefs as well as some of our think tanks across the country, is that in Reform 1.0, which was essentially the race to the top era up until about 2 years ago, it was about raising the bar. It was making standards more rigorous, making the assessment more authentic and more rigorous. It was about evaluation, et cetera. What we didn't necessarily do as great a job of as a country is making sure that we gave the supports for implementation to help people meet the bar. And so this plan is about saying, great, we want to hold the line on making sure the bar stays high. We have high quality expectations in our materials. We want to provide supports for our teachers. But in order to meet that bar, we actually have to give people more resources and supports to get better and better in their craft and to make sure our kids have what they need every day to access the high quality education we're providing for them. And so the only other thing is we have a new website, bestforall.tnedu.gov. Everyone loves a good government website, and so we were trying to find and build a website that was going to be a little bit more user-friendly. And so this is just a pretty light touch. It has one-pagers for all of the initiatives, some additional annual reports and things. But what it will build into are our standards tools that we will be building out, the resources, the online hubs. It will have connections to the assessment work. But this is more of the practitioner end user interface, whereas the traditional website will still have this information, but it provides a lot more of the technical and compliance information. This is intended to be for your average person. My husband at home who works in one of our schools, our neighbor who has kids in school, our teacher who lives next door. We want them to be able to get to a website and feel like they have access in something that's a little bit more user friendly. With that, I think I got just under the wire for what my allotted time was, but that leaves a little bit of time for questions.
Mr. Eby?
Thank you. Very exciting for sure. And I like on the vision where you're looking at the results. 2 years after graduation, do they meet one of these 4 criteria? How are you going to track those students 2 years? I know for the EPP program, they were trying to track teachers 2 to 3 years post, and they were having a lot of difficulty doing that. So what's the plan on how to track the students 2 years after, and what kind of percentages do you think you'll get responses from?
Yeah, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult. The hardest one is actually military enlistment because of data sharing agreements. The military, and we've, Tennessee, as well as in my prior life in Texas, have actually gone to the Department of Defense to try to figure it out, and you have to do it one by one for thousands of students. No one's super interested in doing that. But what we have found is that for most of our higher ed, since the majority of students in Tennessee, if they're going to school in higher ed, the majority of them stay here. We get a little bit more from some data sharing agreements nationally. We do miss out on some, but we have enough approximation through research to be able to have a proxy amount. We do have great data from our TCATs, and so we've got some good P20 data, and then we do have some workforce data because we can track what field they go into. For the wage, that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because if a child goes into, let's say, the medical profession, you end up getting an approximation. They could have gone into the medical profession and go into a high wage job. They could go into the medical profession and technically be in the custodial staff, which makes a lot less than potentially someone who's a nurse practitioner. So those are all going to be approximations, but we have a consistent metric that we would use year over year based on national trend data and state trend data.
Okay. Yeah. One other question I had, clearly glad to see the early literacy funding.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going into the BEP funding, or is that something totally separate? And the reason I ask that question is if it goes into BEP funding, then that gives the districts would have their choice on how they're going to spend the BEP funding. How would you know, in fact, that the districts would use that for the early literacy?
So, yeah, great question. Any of the funding that I listed here is all outside of the BEP.
Okay, great.
The BEP has the 4% increase to the instructional component of the BEP. I'm going to make sure I say the whole thing. It is not a 4% increase to teacher salaries because of that reason. I think there's going to be some really healthy conversations that the legislature is going to have around kind of how they're thinking about that. And we look forward to hearing about those conversations and being part of them. But the governor also has the fully funding the BEP component, but everything you see here are all programmatic, either grants that would happen outside of the BEP. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I do have a question regarding the high-quality instructional materials. It's not so much about the materials themselves, but the plan for the actual implementation. Because I've had a lot of discussions with school personnel regarding the challenges in getting teachers to use the instructional materials that they purchased for them in the first place. And it just can blow my mind about that, because I understand teachers have their methods for teaching, the choice of the materials that they have selected from those that are approved or things that they've researched. But I think the piece of actualizing that and getting them to use those quality instructional materials may be more challenging than we might think. So what is the game plan regarding the supports to get that to happen?
Sure. So a couple of things. So one is we were looking at kind of the tragedy of the commons, and so we didn't want to just buy all the materials and give them to districts because it's like the grocery store on Saturday. You might not want the cheese dip, but because it's free and it's sitting there, you take a little piece. So we want to make sure, okay, so there's at least one of us that does that, yep. So we wanted to make sure that if we were doing materials, there was equal purchasing between the district and the state, so there was an investment in actually using the materials. You're much more likely to use materials or want your teams to use materials if you have some stake in the ground. That being said, we also know that the second part is on implementation support. Many of our educators have communicated that they were resistant to changing materials in the beginning. When they used them and they had coaching to be successful, it was less about not wanting to change the practice and more about, I know what works for me right now, and now you're telling me to do something completely different. I'm going to get evaluated on it, and I don't know if it's going to work. And so we want to provide that implementation support, and that's also why we think it's so important to be able to give the funds to the early adopters, because now if I'm a teacher, I have other teachers I can call who can walk me through the process and their experience. We've also, we have a relationship with Standards Works, who's been going across the state, and they've been highlighting early adopter districts, putting up videos, social media, et cetera, to be able to show here are districts who are 3, 4, 5 years into this work, and here are the results that they're getting, and just some teacher stories and being able to have that level of engagement.
So there's some districts that are out there today that I know you're aware of, they are using certain instructional materials. They've not purchased them, they're using free versions of those materials. And they're wedded to them. And, you see the excitement when you talk to them because they are moving the needle in the right direction. And it's the knowledge.
CKLA?
Yes. And so, of course, I can't sit here and ask you if you know what those instructional materials are going to be, but I am going to ask you. I shouldn't, perhaps. But do you have any indication of, because Amplify, I think, provides books that are in alignment with,
Yeah, so sure. So anything that's on the state, the adoption list that you all approved would be eligible for this funding. What we have seen, and districts are in the process of adopting right now, what we have seen in terms of the ways they've reported back is that the majority seem to be adopting about 4 predominantly from that list. It tends to be the same 4, and the early adopters almost exclusively have been using CKLA, Wit and Wisdom, and EL. Those are the only ones that the early adopters have really been using. What we are committed to is when we think about high quality materials in the K through 2 space, so that foundational literacy curriculum, that the plan is to ensure that those materials align seamlessly with the high quality materials for the ELA content work. So that way it's not like I'm balancing multiple materials, they work together.
okay, and then point for clarification, this would be for, all of the funding would be for fiscal year beginning July 1st?
Yes.
Except for the recurring, which would be future years. It has not been approved yet officially yet by the General Assembly.
No, we are going to work very hard to communicate the benefits of having every child with high quality materials.
Of course, because we can get excited here because I can speak for only myself. I like the direction this is taking in terms of the programs and the funding and the vision. The reality, of course, is in the implementation and the actual funding to come through the General Assembly. We'll wait and see. Thank you.
Yes. The one thing I just want to say, just from a process perspective, is the funding doesn't come. We do know districts are adopting and purchasing now. So from a process perspective, we're going to put out timelines for districts. We would essentially put out the grants in anticipation of potential funding. We would say conditional upon any kind of allocation from the legislature, but we also know that they have to purchase. And so it would be a reimbursable expense. It wouldn't be something we would purchase on their behalf, just as a clarification.
And I think you said on Ed Prep innovation, that's $3 million?
It's $2 million for Ed Prep and then $1 million for Leader Prep.
Okay. And that's a grant?
Those would be competitive grants to existing institutions.
I'm excited to hear about that. And see how
We're
that
excited to
plays
work out.
very
closely with you on that. So.
Okay. Mr. Edwards, you've been waiting patiently?
I've enjoyed the conversation. It's fascinating. First of all, Commissioner, congratulations to you and the governor on a great state of the state. I don't know of anybody who watched that didn't come away absolutely elated, fired up. So well done.
Thank you.
So I got a couple of areas I want to understand better. The early literacy one and the innovative assessment. So on early literacy, and here's my question. We got a presentation years ago on an early literacy deal, and it was going to be like a 2-year development, maybe 2-year development, then some field time, and then it was going to be started in pre-K and then K, 1, 2, and 3. And I understand the logic of that progression, but at the same time, there's a whole lot of people currently in the continuum that's going to be left on the sidelines, a whole lot. And I have no idea how that program did. So even if those 2 years plus, if it was effective or not, I know that 40-something thousand kids out of 70-something that graduate every year can't go to TCAT or something and read at the level. So the whole notion that you all are focused on, it's awesome. Is it going to be holistic?
So yes, so I'll go through some of the parts of the literacy bill. I want to just acknowledge that reading wars are real for people, and as a state, one of the things that the bill does is it does say that we are taking a stand on saying that we will do evidence-based literacy practices. What that means in reality is that this funding would cover professional development for all teachers. They would receive a stipend for participating in the professional development. If they have already participated in science of reading or evidence-based literacy, PD, and we know a number have, especially in those first couple of years of Race to the Top, there was a lot of professional development for the first 4 years, and then it kind of went away for the last 4, and we think that this is the right work right now. So if they participated in the past, they would be able to either demonstrate competency through a certification, or it's kind of open to the department. So we have a number of early adopter districts. Those districts and those teachers would not have to participate, though they are welcome and encouraged to do so. It covers K through 2, and it is all teachers, special education teachers, reading interventionists, paras, anyone who is involved in a child learning to read, and it's all K through 2 teachers within the same 1-year time period. So it's not the slow growth model, because we know we have kids who need resources now. It also includes ongoing, recurring professional development and implementation support. We know that one of the most important things that did happen in a really positive way over the last 4 years is the coaching networks and being able to have a lot of teacher-to-teacher coaching, real-time classroom coaching. So we want to make sure that that stays and that we expand that statewide. The thing that I think is going to be the most challenging is that our districts have communicated that our teachers are coming out, their first, second, third year teachers, and haven't necessarily received evidence-based literacy programming within their schools, or they've received lots of different options. There have been a lot of blogs and articles and research reports on that, especially over the last several months.
Yeah.
This literacy bill does say pretty unapologetically that we will teach evidence-based literacy in our education preparation programs, and that is all we will teach. We will not teach leveled literacy or balanced literacy. And if you are going to teach a teacher how to teach a child how to read, you yourself either have to have a current teaching credential or have to have experience having taught that yourself.
So a kid who's in the 5th grade today who is destined to be one of those 40-something thousand, walk across the stage, get a diploma and can't read, how are we going to address them going forward?
Yeah,
And all the others that are, you get the point.
Yeah, I do. Especially, I mean, we've got a third of our students, just a little over, who are proficient in 3rd and 4th grade. Unfortunately, that drops to 27% by 8th grade. And I think it goes from there. So what we're saying is a couple things. One is we are super excited at the potential of the funding, assuming anything gets approved by the legislature. Number 2, we want to start with K2, and then it would go 3-5. However, we do think that the $20 million in the proposed budget for high-quality instructional materials, that would go K8. And so it does cover that K through 8th grade for the high-quality materials, and we know that most of those materials come with foundational supports with them. We also have a lot of the intervention work that's built out as part of the literacy, and so you'd be able to have high-quality materials plus intervention. It is not the level of intervention that you're seeing in K through 2 for those older students. That is going to be something that will have to be developed over time.
Before I go to my next one, the thing that is just hard for me, it's sort of like Sophie's Choice. Well, going through this methodically, we're basically saying if you're in high school today, you're going to be one of those 40,000, and we know it. Well, I mean, we're sitting here and we're acknowledging that, and that's just hard to do. We've done it for too long, and it's just hard to do. It's
Before you, I don't know if you're going to change from early literacy or not. Oh, could I intervene, because I've got a question to follow with that,
Please.
and then I'll yield back to you. So on the early literacy with regard to teaching the teachers, you are stating that, and then you're expecting higher ed to just respond to that, and then as we evaluate the EPPs, that's how that process goes, or how are you interfacing with higher ed to get them to teach this evidence base?
So the bill would require that shift to be made by 2023, and that's because we know that there's course catalogs that are built out, et cetera. Part of the resources that are allocated in the budget would be for competitive grants for higher ed, both to frame out what that course sequence would look like. It would also provide professional development. It would give an opportunity for them to train any existing instructors who would need to be able to meet those new requirements. We also, for all of the trainings, we have an expanded version. The training is very similar to the Mississippi model, where you have a 1 week of understanding science of reading and a second week of implementation and practice. We have an expanded model of that where higher ed would have as many seats as they need to be able to participate in that training, along with our core offices and our district offices. So they have a lot of different financial opportunities and grants available to help make that shift. We think that's going to be a tough conversation, but I think because there are so many financial resources attached, we feel very confident that our higher eds want to do the best possible job for our future teachers, and so we're excited about that partnership. But I do think that one of the things we're going to want to continue to talk about is certification. It's something that when you talk to states like Massachusetts, they are having very active conversations with their vendor. They're having active conversations with Praxis because there isn't a lot of literacy work in that space. And if you want to make sure that our kids are proficient, we have to make sure that our teachers have what they need to get students proficient in reading. And right now, that's not, it's not comprehensively included in many of those practices. And that's something that some of the higher performing states are really doubling down on. And we think that's something that's going to be important here. That's going to be, as we flush that out and see if the bill passes, what it looks like when it passes, that would then be the point in which we're going to want to have some pretty significant conversations about what those next steps would look like. You're welcome.
All right, so innovative assessments. I got a number of questions, but it's sort of are we talking about in the course EOCs that we're bringing in-house and going to own? Are we talking about those courses that aren't provided EOCs that, you're aligning, making sure the assessments align with the standards? Well, first of all, what are we talking about?
So we're talking about any assessment in the TCAP. So it could be anything from the third grade assessment to the EOC, any test where we own the items, we develop and own the items, we would be able to then use those items to build out interim assessments that match the annual blueprint, and then use additional items to build out those formative assessments that match the instructional materials. That's kind of part one of the three-pronged innovative assessment work.
So I've been on a jihad because a couple years ago we eliminated the EOC in chemistry and English 3. Chemistry and English 3. And my concern is the alignment issue if it's left to the local LEA. And the other one is that it took away the requirement for the course to be taught by someone endorsed in chemistry. So it becomes more like physics, which if we're going to go in another direction, we ought to. But your whole point about every kid deserves a qualified, certified teacher, I also think they ought to be endorsed in the content area. But would this be able to make restoration of a standard aligned test easier to reinstate?
So I'm going to start with saying no, but, so I think this would be about the existing assessments that are required. That being said, what we've seen in other states is that, again, when we see districts are purchasing tests, we never want to see districts buying assessments. We want districts to purchase materials and supports for teachers and things that help students along the way. What we can do is we can explore what it would look like to provide free assessments, not part of accountability and not required, but we can have form assessments. And we've seen a lot of states do that, especially in the transition between ESEA and ESSA. They've said, okay, great, we don't have a geometry test, but we want to have a standard one that we can use as our quote unquote final exam. That is something that the state could do without requiring anything for districts, which would be, the cost on that becomes quite expensive to have a new required assessment year over year. We could have a standard assessment that would be used as a final, an interim, and a suite of formatives.
See, that pretty much gets me to where I'm a lot more comfortable. Because I was having to think through that our only recourse is to reinstate the EOC. I just want, Well, I think y'all got your heads on, and thank you for
Sure.
doing what you're doing.
I think we're all in it for kids, so it's nice to be in an environment where that's the case. It's not always the case, so thank you very much.
I have a few questions, but I'll go quick,
Please proceed.
I promise. Okay, so we talk about the training for K-2 teachers. So, you know, we've done this in the past where we have massive state trainings and then it's good luck until 6 years later.
Yep.
So I know we've mentioned the coaching network. So what would be the follow-up or the follow-through after the training?
Yep.
Then what would be next?
So kind of a more detailed of what implementation looks
Yes,
like? Yep.
yes.
So you have the training. There's 3 different components of the implementation. So first and foremost is we have the core regional offices. One of the things that I didn't mention in the budget, but that the governor has in his proposed budget is 2 additional staff members for each core region. What that allows is for additional staff to cover priority 1 in academics, 1 person to cover whole child and 1 person to cover educators, again, aligning core to the strategic plan. We've also heard from districts that they just need more support at the local level. So when we think about the staff who would be at the core regions, they would have some allocation on an annual basis to bring together the district lead. So every district's literacy lead would come on a monthly basis and get coaching and support, problem solve, cohorts, etc. So that's 1. Second is in the first year, every district would have both a needs assessment at their elementary schools. So that way we know kind of here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and here's kind of that gap to get where we want to go. So we'd have that needs assessment. It allows for 2 site visits plus coaching support. It also allows in that first year to have some level of coaching support at every one of the schools, again, to be able to think about early implementation. So that's part 2. Part 3 is the ongoing implementation support. We have between 900 to 1,000 elementary schools. If you look at a standalone elementary versus a K-8 versus K-12, so let's call it 950. What we've budgeted for is 250 schools in each of 4 cohorts. In year 1 of that cohort, they get what we call 100% support. Year 2 is 75 to 50%, year 3 is 25%, and year 4 is on your own. Then you get to year 5 and you go back to year 1. So essentially you never lose the support because we know there's turnover in teachers and principals, so we want to make sure that's consistent. Year 1 support, so full support, looks like up to 3 to 4 PD sessions a year, so pretty significant PD at the school site. It includes a site visit walkthrough, so you're going with your school lead, you have your implementation support coaches, you potentially have some core staff, maybe some district staff, you're walking through classrooms, you're supporting coaching and teachers, then you have PD in the afternoon, that happens once a month. In year 2, you go to having that 5 to 6 times per year in 2 PD sessions. In year 3, you have a PD session, and then you have semester or quarter-based support. Then you go to kind of implementation on your own and start over. So again, it's to create cohorts of teachers and schools working together. It ensures that you have ongoing support in perpetuity, and it allows for districts to select who they would like to be in their coaching network. What it does not do is it does not say that we are going to bloat state government and say that we are going to hire the coaches, train the coaches, and then deploy them across the state. We believe that it has to be, there are a lot of people who are experts in this, who are in local communities and areas, and so we want to make sure that local districts are able to select who's in their classrooms and in their schools and providing that level of support to teachers and principals.
Awesome. I think, you know, we've talked about the trust fund for mental health and all of those things, and of course, most educators and administrators would say that's the number 1 priority. I mean, they've told you that. You've heard that. So I think it's going to really change a lot of things for the better. Obviously, social workers, counselors would be part of that. But what else do you envision that fund being used for besides personnel?
Sure, that's a great question. So, and I'm going to try to answer it briefly because it has become a more than professional, it's a personal passion now to make sure that all of our kids are supported in the ways they need. But the trust fund, essentially, because we're going to do the needs assessment, it starts to build interest starting next year. What we would do is that needs assessment allows us to understand what are the personnel requirements, what are the existing community resources, which is part of the needs assessment. We want to identify in any district what are the current nonprofits, the government agencies, the additional supports, and how have those been connected or not connected into our schools. And then it also looks at just what the general needs of the community are, some of the demographic statistics, some of the health needs, et cetera. things like, is there access to a hospital? Do you have mental health professionals in the county? We have entire counties with one person for all adults and children. So that's part of the needs assessment. From there, we would be able to say, again, and just to be super transparent, we're talking about $5 to $8 million in interest that's earned, and that's the money we would be able to use against the corpus. So in that, we'd be able to do pilot programs potentially, but I think this year is really the time where we would bring people together, agencies, elected officials, state board members, principals, superintendents, teachers, to really have the conversation about what we can do with the funds and what the best use is. That does not preclude, I think, any other conversations related to ratios or funding, et cetera, that might happen certainly in this body as well as with our legislature.
Perfect. Last question. Well, there's two parts to this funnel. We talked about the creation of assessments, formative assessments throughout the year and building of a test bank. How large do you expect, because we're looking at launching that in the fall, correct? How large would the test bank be? Would it be fairly small, where it's kind of the same questions, or would this be a fairly, I know it will build as they release, but what are we looking at as far as how big it'll be?
But yeah, so this fall, we're gonna meet our expectations a little bit. What we think we can get to is we will absolutely have interim assessments this year. Currently, the timeline says that those will be available by December because they're needed by about March and February. We will have pilot formative assessments, again, because we don't want to build out all of them, give them, and then teachers are like, this is not what we need and not helpful. So we're going to do a couple of samples across grades and content areas, get a ton of feedback, and then just go forward and build them out. Right now, we do not have an assessment bank that is healthy enough for you to say you would have 400 questions available. What we do have is, because we saved $15 million plus in negotiating the new assessment contract, with the additional $2 million per year recurring, if that is allocated by the legislature, that allows us to order a ton of new items every single year and field test them. We don't want to just buy items and then assume they're aligned. We do want to put them through the field testing process so we have the same statistics and know that it has the same reliability as some of the items we put on our summative assessment. We expect to be able to have a robust formative bank within the next 2 years. We had a massive order this year. They'll be field tested this spring and next spring. So if you're thinking about spring 22 and going into the 22-23 school year, we expect to have a full suite of formatives, all of our interims, and then a healthy bank from which to use. And that's, we think, for every standard, we should have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 questions or so. You need 5 to be able to get a good sense of depth of knowledge.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I do have to announce that we are going to have to wrap up pretty quickly because we've certainly we're thankful for the TBR, but they are asking that we wrap up as quickly as possible. We've covered a lot, and this has been a great discussion, and I don't want to cut anyone off. So we have about 5 minutes left, and that means any other closing comments that need to be made. Ms. Kim has a question.
Yes, so what is the proposed window that the strategic plan would cover?
So the strategic plan right now, the governor's requested every commissioner to have a strategic plan that lasts the first term. As you can imagine, we expect that to be able to fully implement, this is a 7.5-year plan.
Got it. And this is a couple just reactions, which probably won't be surprising given my commentary on the last round. But, you know, it feels, I realize, counterintuitive for such a big entity, like what we're trying to do in terms of educating so many K-12 students. Like, it seems counterintuitive to try and narrow the focus, but I would argue strongly that the bigger the entity, like, the more pointed we have to be, because the levers available for us to pull, unless we're like many, many tens of thousands of people, are pretty limited. And so my worry in all of this is that, you know, embedded, and by the way, any individual, like, slide, just to be super clear, is quite brilliant. Like, in terms of, like, I look at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's, like, incredible. I would, you know, like, so individually, it's the whole that makes me worried, because there are, you know, arguably like 20 different, basically, startups embedded in here. So, like, by the way, kudos to you for the 1,000 recruits for the teacher residency. That is the kind of teacher recruiting innovation that this state desperately needs. So I'm very excited about that whole thread. It's also simultaneously true that, you know, having recruited lots of teachers in my life, like, that is a massive endeavor. And it just begs lots of questions about who's going to do the work, how is it going to be allocated, the number of technologists required for all just the online portals and testing and assessment, putting all the, you know, tests over time for parents to access. Admittedly stretches my own personal credulity just because it is just a lot in total. So maybe if it's a 7-year plan, it would be helpful to know the cadence of this and relative prioritization so that all of us are set up to be successful in any one of the endeavors we take on.
Yeah, sure. So I'll do just 2 quick kind of reactions to that. So I think one is part of what we're trying to do is say, this is work that is already happening. How do we strengthen that and put more resources? This is not, just to be clear, we do not think 425 people at the department are going to do this. We think from a kind of theory of action perspective, and certainly this governor's perspective, is around contracting with experts who are able to do that. So technology, we're not going to expand our IT team. We will probably look to experts who are able to build that. And I think for each of these specific initiatives, we have pretty robust project plans. And so we're happy to share that with any of you if you're interested in kind of what the timeline is, how we're going to fund it, and what we expect in terms of summative and input metrics. Happy to share those and talk through them at any point.
Excellent comments. Thank you for that. I know it's hard to cut off the conversation because it's been a great conversation, great discussion. We're all excited about what we're hearing from you. And but I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to. And with you talking as quickly as you do.
Yeah, I told you I was going to try.
That's really incredible. I'm not going to ask if anybody has any more questions because we do have to vacate the room. So without objection, I do dissolve the committee of the whole, and we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow.